The full moon cast long shadows across Arlington Cemetery, where 13-year-old Sarah Matthews huddled behind a weathered tombstone. Her thin jacket offered little protection against the autumn chill, but she remained motionless, holding her breath as footsteps crunched through fallen leaves nearby. "The brakes will fail on his morning drive," a woman's voice cut through the silence, elegant, refined, yet chilling in its calculation. "It'll look like a tragic accident. No one will suspect anything." Sarah pressed herself closer to the cold stone, her heart pounding. She recognized that voice. It belonged to Rachel Thompson, wife of the wealthy businessman Michael Thompson. Sarah had seen her before, stepping out of luxury cars in designer clothes, the very picture of sophistication. But now, in the cemetery's ghostly quiet, that same voice dripped with malice. "Are you sure about this?" Rachel, a man's voice, responded, tense with nervous energy. "Once we do this, there's no turning back." Having second thoughts, Terry, Rachel's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Remember what's at stake. Once Michael's gone, his fortune becomes mine. We'll split it, just as planned. Unless you'd prefer to keep watching your big brother live in luxury while you struggle." Sarah's fingers dug into the dirt beside her mother's grave. She came here most nights, finding comfort in talking to the mother she'd lost 2 years ago. But tonight she'd stumbled upon something terrifying, a murder plot between Mrs. Thompson and her brother-in-law. "The timing has to be perfect," Terry continued, his voice growing stronger. "He always takes that winding road to the office, when the brakes fail there." "It'll be quick," Rachel finished. "A tragic accident. Everyone knows how dangerous that road can be." Sarah's mind raced to Michael Thompson, the man whose life they were so casually planning to end. She'd seen him too, always kind to his staff, generous to local charities. Once, she'd even watched him help an elderly woman with her groceries, never mentioning who he was. Now his own wife and brother were plotting his death. "Tomorrow morning, then," Rachel declared. "No more delays. I've waited long enough to be free of him." The footsteps began moving away, but Sarah remained frozen, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Her mother had taught her that doing nothing in the face of evil made you part of that evil. But what could a homeless 13-year-old girl do against wealthy, powerful adults? The answer came to her slowly, as she traced her mother's name on the tombstone, Catherine Matthews. Her mom had always said that truth was the most powerful weapon of all. Sarah stood on shaking legs, determination replacing fear. She had to warn Michael Thompson, had to try to save him, no matter the cost. As she slipped through the cemetery gates, Sarah glanced back at her mother's grave. "I'll do what's right, Mom," she whispered. "Just like you taught me." The city lights beckoned ahead, and somewhere in that glittering landscape was the Thompson mansion. Sarah pulled her jacket tighter and began walking. She had until morning to find a way to save a man's life. Join us on this emotional journey of justice and redemption. Every subscription helps bring more powerful stories that touch hearts. Michael Thompson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city lights flicker like stars beneath him. At 45, he had achieved everything society deemed as success: a billion-dollar empire, a mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood, and a reputation as one of the most influential businessmen in the country. Yet something hollow echoed in the vast, empty spaces of his life. 20 years ago, he had started with nothing but determination and a loan from his parents' modest savings. His father, a factory worker, and his mother, a schoolteacher, had believed in him enough to risk their retirement fund. That trust became the foundation of his relentless drive. Through countless sleepless nights and sacrificed weekends, he built Thompson Enterprises from a small consulting firm into a global corporation. The cost of his success, however, was paid in moments lost. He missed his father's final days, too caught up in a crucial merger to spend more than a few hurried hours at the hospital. His mother passed away 6 months later. The doctors said it was heart failure, But Michael knew she had died of heartbreak, both for her husband and for the son who had become a stranger. The guilt of those losses still haunted his quiet moments. His marriage to Rachel 5 years ago was supposed to fill the growing void. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and seemed to understand his dedication to work. The society pages called them the perfect power couple, but their relationship had all the warmth of a business transaction. Their conversations rarely ventured beyond social events and household management. At night they slept in separate wings of their mansion, their distance measured not just in feet, but in the growing silence between them. Even his relationship with Terry, his younger brother, had become strained. Once inseparable as children, they now met only at obligatory family events. Michael had tried to help Terry with jobs and investments, but each attempt seemed to widen the gulf between them. He couldn't understand why his brother refused to apply himself, to grasp the opportunities Michael offered. The only genuine moments in his life came from unexpected quarters, brief exchanges with the cleaning staff who worked late hours, conversations with the elderly security guard who always had a kind word, and the satisfaction of his anonymous charitable donations. These small acts of humanity felt more real than the power lunches and board meetings that filled his calendar. Recently, he had started taking long walks through the city at dawn, before his chauffeur arrived. Something about watching the city wake up, shopkeepers raising their shutters, children heading to school, street vendors setting up their carts, reminded him of simpler times. Sometimes he would buy coffee from a small corner shop, enjoying how the owner treated him like any other customer, not knowing he could buy the entire building without blinking. On his office wall hung his most prized possession, not the numerous awards or magazine covers, but a faded photograph of his parents on their 30th wedding anniversary. His father's worn hands and his mother's tired but happy smile told a story of a different kind of wealth. They had little money, but their home had been rich with laughter, love, and purpose. As another evening settled over the city, Michael loosened his tie and faced the truth he usually kept buried under work and obligations. He had built an empire, but lost his kingdom. His wealth could buy anything except what he truly craved: genuine connection, purpose beyond profit, the warmth of real family bonds. Tomorrow would bring another day of meetings, decisions, and deals. But tonight, standing in his silent office, Michael Thompson, the man who seemed to have everything, felt the weight of all he had lost. The city lights below continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the lonely figure watching from above. A king in a castle built of glass and steel, surrounded by everything and nothing at all. Rachel Thompson glided through her pristine mansion like a perfectly crafted sculpture, every movement calculated, every smile precisely measured. At 35, she had mastered the art of being the perfect trophy wife, beautiful, charming, and seemingly devoted to her successful husband. But beneath her polished exterior lurked a darkness that grew deeper with each passing day. She stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting a string of flawless pearls against her neck. These were her armor, along with the designer dresses and carefully maintained appearance. 5 years of marriage to Michael had taught her the importance of keeping up appearances, of never letting the mask slip. But alone in her private moments, rage simmered beneath her perfect facade. The roots of her resentment stretched back to their courtship. Michael had pursued her with the same determination he applied to his business deals. She had been dazzled by his wealth, his power, and what she thought was his devotion. But soon after their wedding, she discovered the truth. She was just another acquisition, a beautiful ornament to complete his collection of success symbols. Their marriage was a masterclass in hollow intimacy. Michael's idea of romance was expensive jewelry delivered by his assistant, lavish parties where she played the perfect hostess, and vacations spent watching him work by the pool. He never noticed how her smile didn't reach her eyes, how she flinched at his absent-minded touches, how she had stopped trying to share her thoughts and dreams. The breaking point came 2 years ago when doctors confirmed she couldn't have children. Michael had responded with practiced sympathy and immediately buried himself in work, leaving her alone with her grief. That night, as she sat in their empty nursery, something inside her hardened. She realized she would never be more than a decorative piece in Michael's carefully constructed world. Her relationship with Terry, Michael's younger brother, began innocently enough. He was everything Michael wasn't: attentive, passionate, understanding. Their shared resentment of Michael's success brought them closer. Late-night conversations about their frustrations turned into planning sessions, and gradually their shared pain transformed into something darker. Rachel maintained her perfect wife routine with precision. She attended charity galas, hosted dinner parties, and played the supportive spouse. But inside, she savored the irony of her deception. The society women who envied her life had no idea that she spent her private hours plotting her husband's demise with his own brother. She had studied Michael's habits meticulously. His morning routine was unchanging: the same breakfast, the same route to work, the same unconscious trust in her devotion. His predictability would be his downfall. The thought brought a genuine smile to her face, the first real expression she'd shown in days. The magnitude of their plan should have frightened her, but Rachel felt only anticipation. Years of suppressed anger had crystallized into cold determination. She wasn't just planning a murder, she was orchestrating her liberation. The fortune she would inherit was just a bonus. What she really craved was freedom from the gilded cage Michael had built around her. As twilight settled over the mansion, Rachel stood at her window, watching the shadows lengthen across their manicured lawn. Tomorrow would change everything. No more pretense, no more smiling through gritted teeth, no more playing the perfect wife. She touched the pearls at her neck, imagining how they would look against black mourning clothes. A noise from Michael's study reminded her of his presence, and she automatically adjusted her expression back to one of serene contentment. The mask slipped back into place with practiced ease. Let him see what he expected: his beautiful, grateful wife. Soon enough, he would see nothing at all. Among the weathered headstones of Arlington Cemetery, 13-year-old Sarah Matthews sat cross-legged before her mother's grave, careful not to wrinkle the worn uniform she wore for her after-school dishwashing job. Her fingers traced the engraved letters: Catherine Matthews, beloved mother, faithful friend. The stone was simple, paid for by her mother's savings, the last remnant of Catherine's pride in never asking for help, even at the end. 2 years had passed since her mother's death, but Sarah could still vividly recall their life in the Thompson mansion's servant quarters. Catherine had been more than just the head housekeeper. She was the heart of the household staff, beloved for her kindness and quiet strength. For 7 years, she had managed the massive estate with grace, creating order from chaos while raising Sarah alone. Sarah remembered the hidden moments of joy in those days, helping her mother polish the grand staircase, sneaking cookies from the kitchen during midnight baking sessions for the Thompsons' elaborate parties, falling asleep to her mother's soft humming as she mended uniforms late into the night. They might have been staff, but they had each other, and that was enough. Everything changed the day Rachel Thompson became the new mistress of the house. The elegant bride took an immediate dislike to Catherine, perhaps sensing how the staff looked to her for guidance rather than their new mistress. Small criticisms became harsh reprimands, and suddenly every task Catherine performed was found wanting. Sarah would never forget how her mother's hands began to shake when serving tea, dreading Rachel's cold scrutiny. The final blow came during a winter charity gala. Rachel had accused Catherine of stealing an expensive diamond bracelet, a claim that sent ripples of disbelief through the household. Everyone knew Catherine's unshakable honesty, how she'd once traveled across town to return a stranger's dropped wallet. But Rachel was relentless, and Michael, consumed by business affairs, simply signed the termination papers his wife placed before him. The bracelet was found a week later in Rachel's private safe, apparently misplaced, but by then, Catherine and Sarah had already been forced to leave their home of 7 years. No apology came, no offer to return. They moved into a tiny apartment on the city's outskirts, Catherine taking whatever work she could find to keep them afloat. Sarah watched her mother's decline with helpless anguish. The woman who once managed a mansion with ease now struggled through long shifts at diners and cleaning offices. Her persistent cough was ignored until it could no longer be hidden. By the time they reached the hospital, the cancer had spread too far. Catherine's final weeks were spent in a sterile hospital room, still refusing to seek help from her former employers. Now, Sarah survived through a patchwork of odd jobs and the kindness of strangers. She worked as a dishwasher after school, cleaned offices on weekends, and sometimes helped the cemetery groundskeeper in exchange for being allowed to stay near her mother's grave on cold nights. Her old school uniform, carefully maintained, helped her blend in during the day, hiding her circumstances from teachers and classmates. What no one knew was that Sarah had inherited her mother's sharp mind and quiet resilience. She maintained perfect grades despite her situation, studying in the public library until closing time. Her mother's final words echoed in her thoughts daily: "Never let circumstances define you, my brave girl. Your character is your true wealth." The irony of now being the one to save Michael Thompson wasn't lost on Sarah. He had been an absent figure during their time at the mansion, barely noticing the staff who maintained his perfect world. Yet her mother had always spoken of him with a strange sympathy, seeing past his wealth to a fundamental loneliness she recognized. As twilight deepened around the cemetery, Sarah gathered her worn backpack, tucking away the small notebook where she recorded her daily conversations with her mother. Tomorrow she would try to save a man who had forgotten them, not for his sake, but because her mother would have done the same. In the growing darkness, Catherine's epitaph seemed to glow faithful friend, a reminder that integrity remained long after everything else was lost. Beneath the polished surface of the Thompson family's world lay a tangled web of secrets, each thread connecting past to present in ways none of them fully understood. Detective James Parker stood in his dimly lit office, staring at the evidence board he'd maintained for 2 years. News clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes covered the wall, all centered around the death of Catherine Matthews. The official report listed natural causes, but Parker had never believed it. He'd been the one to find Catherine collapsed outside her apartment, clutching a letter he was never able to locate. Her last words tell Sarah about the safe had haunted him ever since. But what safe? And why had she used her final breath to mention it? His investigation had uncovered a series of disturbing connections. The diamond bracelet incident that led to Catherine's dismissal coincided with several large withdrawals from the Thompson corporate accounts. Money that disappeared into offshore accounts, traced back to shell companies bearing Terry Thompson's digital fingerprints. Catherine, as head housekeeper, had access to Michael's home office and his financial records. Rachel Thompson's past held its own shadows. Before marrying Michael, she had been engaged to Thomas Blackwood, heir to a rival business empire. His death in a suspicious car accident brake failure on a winding road had been ruled an accident. Parker's research revealed that Rachel had been the beneficiary of a substantial insurance policy. The detective couldn't ignore the similar pattern now emerging with her marriage to Michael. The most troubling connection centered on the night Michael and Terry's parents died. Official records showed a tragic house fire, but Parker had discovered that Catherine Matthews worked as their part-time housekeeper back then. She had called in sick that night, the only time in her spotless employment history. Years later, she had sought out employment specifically at Michael Thompson's mansion. Why? Terry Thompson's financials told their own story. Massive gambling debts, failed business ventures, and increasingly desperate attempts to match his brother's success. But underneath the obvious money problems, Parker had found evidence of regular payments from Rachel's private account. The transactions began 3 months after her marriage to Michael, the same time Catherine had started working late hours in the mansion's office wing. Sarah's school records revealed a brilliant mind hiding behind careful anonymity. Her essays often touched on themes of justice and moral responsibility, written with an insight far beyond her years. Parker had recognized her mother's influence. Catherine had been known for her quiet wisdom. But there was something else in Sarah's writings, hints of knowledge about the Thompsons that she shouldn't possess. In his 20 years on the force, Parker had learned that wealth didn't prevent tragedy, it just made the fall more spectacular. He'd watched the Thompson family from afar, seeing the cracks in their perfect facade growing wider. Rachel's carefully curated public image couldn't hide her increasing restlessness. Terry's desperate attempts to maintain appearances while drowning in debt. Michael's isolation in his tower of success. The detective pulled out his most recent discovery, a photograph from Catherine's belongings. It showed a young Catherine standing with Michael and Terry's mother, both women smiling warmly at the camera. On the back, a handwritten note, "Remember your promise." The date was 1 week before the fatal fire. Parker added the photo to his wall, stepping back to study the complete picture. Every person in this web was connected by more than chance. Catherine, Michael, Rachel, Terry, and young Sarah. Each carried pieces of a truth they didn't fully grasp. The question wasn't if these secrets would surface, but when and at what cost. As night settled over the city, Parker's phone buzzed with a message from one of his informants at the cemetery. Sarah Matthews had been seen hiding behind a tombstone, witnessing a late-night meeting between Rachel and Terry Thompson. The detective's instincts sharpened. The web was beginning to unravel. Tomorrow would bring either truth or tragedy, and Sarah was now at the center of it all. Dawn had barely broken over the city when Sarah arrived at the Thompson mansion's gates, her heart pounding against her ribs. She'd walked all night, rehearsing what she would say, how she would make Michael Thompson believe a homeless 13-year-old girl about his wife's murderous intentions. Her worn sneakers were soaked from the morning dew, and her school uniform, the only decent clothes she owned, was wrinkled from her night in the cemetery. And through the ornate iron gates, she could see the mansion's circular driveway where a black Mercedes waited, its engine already purring. Time was running out. Sarah watched as a uniformed chauffeur held the car door open and Michael Thompson emerged from the mansion, briefcase in hand, typing something on his phone. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, distinguished, completely unaware that his life was hanging by a thread. Without allowing herself to hesitate, Sarah squeezed through a gap in the hedges and ran toward the driveway. "Mr. Thompson, please," wait. Her voice cracked with desperation. The chauffeur moved to intercept her, but Sarah dodged around him, her small size working to her advantage. "Your brakes, they've been tampered with. Please, you can't drive that car." Michael looked up from his phone, startled by the commotion. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion as he took in the disheveled girl before him. "What are you talking about? Who are you talking about? Who are you?" "I heard them, your wife and your brother. Last night in the cemetery." Sarah spoke rapidly, knowing each second was precious. "They planned it all. The brakes will fail on the winding road. They want it to look like an accident." Her words tumbled out, sounding wild even to her own ears. The chauffeur grabbed her arm. "Sir, shall I call security?" Michael raised his hand, something in Sarah's desperate eyes giving him pause. Wait, he studied her more closely. There was something familiar about her face, though he couldn't place it. "You're saying my wife and brother are trying to kill me?" Sarah nodded vigorously, tears forming in her eyes. "Please, you have to believe me. I heard everything. Mrs. Thompson said once you're gone, she gets everything. They've planned it all." She could see doubt warring with concern in his expression. "Just check the brakes, please." What could it hurt to check? A movement in an upstairs window caught Sarah's attention. Rachel Thompson stood watching, her perfect features arranged in a mask of concern. Their eyes met briefly, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine at the cold calculation she saw there. "So," the chauffeur interrupted, "you'll be late for your meeting." Michael hesitated, his hand on the car door. Sarah made one last desperate attempt. "Your wife said the winding road would be perfect, no one would question an accident there. Please, Mr. Thompson, I'm not lying. I wouldn't be here if I was." Something in her voice, the raw honesty, the genuine fear, reached through Michael's skepticism. He straightened, adjusting his tie. Jenkins, call the garage. Have them check the brakes before I leave. But sir, your meeting. Can wait. Michael's voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. He turned back to Sarah, his expression softening slightly. Come inside. I want to hear exactly what you overheard. As they walked toward the mansion, Sarah felt Rachel's gaze burning into her back. She'd done it, she'd made him listen. But as the mansion's heavy doors closed behind them, she realized this was just the beginning. She'd stepped into a dangerous game, and Rachel Thompson would not easily forgive this interference. Inside his study, Michael gestured for Sarah to sit in a leather chair that probably cost more than everything she'd ever owned. She perched on the edge, acutely aware of her muddy shoes on the pristine carpet. Before she could begin her story, Jenkins burst into the room, his face pale. Sir, you need to see this. His hands shook slightly. The brake lines, they've been cut. If you'd taken the car he trailed off, the implication's clear. Michael sank into his chair, the color draining from his face. He looked at Sarah with new eyes, really seeing her for the first time. You saved my life. His voice was barely a whisper. Then, more strongly, who are you? How did you know? Sarah took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders just as her mother had taught her. My name is Sarah Matthews. Catherine Matthews was my mother. We used to live here, in the servants' quarters, before Mrs. Thompson accused her of stealing. Recognition flickered in Michael's eyes, followed by something that looked like shame. Catherine? I remember. She was our housekeeper, he frowned. But that was years ago. Where is she now? She died 2 years ago. Sarah's voice remained steady, though her hands clenched in her lap. I've been on my own since then. I spend nights in the cemetery where she's buried. That's how I overheard your wife and brother last night. The weight of this revelation seemed to age Michael before her eyes. He opened his mouth to respond, but a gentle knock at the door interrupted them. Rachel stood in the doorway, a vision of concerned elegance in her designer dress. Darling, is everything all right? Jenkins said something about the car, her eyes fixed on Sarah, a flash of recognition and fury quickly masked by polite concern. Who is this? The mansion's 3-car garage felt colder than usual as Michael, Sarah, and Jenkins gathered around the elevated Mercedes. The head mechanic, Tom Wilson, lay on his back beneath the vehicle, his flashlight beam revealing the deliberate destruction that would have ended Michael's life. The morning sun streaming through the high windows did nothing to warm the chill that had settled over the group. It's professional work, Mr. Thompson, Tom said, sliding out from under the car. His weathered face was grim as he wiped his hands on a shop rag. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. The brake lines were cut in a way that would have caused them to fail gradually right around the time you'd hit those curves on Mountain Road. He pointed to the clean, precise cuts that would have meant death at 60 miles per hour. Michael's face had gone ashen as he stared at the evidence of his intended murder. Sarah stood slightly apart, her arms wrapped around herself, watching Rachel through the garage's glass windows. The elegant Mrs. Thompson stood in the garden, speaking urgently into her phone, likely warning Terry about their failed plan. There's more, Sir Tom continued, leading them to his workbench. He laid out several photographs taken beneath the vehicle. See these marks here? The cuts were made with a specialized tool, the kind used in professional garages. And look at the angle of the cuts. Whoever did this had access to a lift. They took their time, made sure it would look like normal wear and tear when the lines finally gave out. Jenkins, who had served the Thompson family for 15 years, looked physically ill. Sir, only a few people have access to the garage at night. I can provide you with the security logs. Not yet, Michael interrupted, his voice carrying an edge Sarah had never heard before. For now, this stays between us. He turned to Tom. Can you repair it? Already started, sir. But Tom hesitated, glancing at Sarah before continuing. You should know this isn't the first time I've had concerns. Last month I noticed the lug nuts on your wheels had been loosened. I thought it was a mistake, tightened them up. Then last week, the power steering fluid was nearly empty. I'd been doing extra checks, but I never imagined. Sarah watched as Michael absorbed this information. She could almost see the pieces falling into place in his mind, all the small incidents that he'd dismissed, all the warning signs he'd ignored. His perfect world was crumbling around him, and she felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. "Mr. Thompson," she said quietly, drawing his attention, "there's something else you should know." Last night in the cemetery, Mrs. Thompson said this wasn't their first attempt. She told your brother that this time they couldn't fail, that everything was already arranged, the insurance, the inheritance, everything. Michael's hands clenched into fists before he forced them to relax. "Tom, I need you to document everything. Photographs, video, detailed notes. Then fix the car, make it look like nothing was wrong." He turned to Jenkins. "Call my office. Cancel all my meetings for the next few days. Tell them I'm taking a brief vacation at the lake house." Sir Jenkins looked confused. "Rachel and Terry need to think their plan is still in place." Michael's voice was cold, calculated. "They need to believe they have another chance." And when they take it, he left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The businessman she'd known from her childhood, always distracted, buried in his phone, had vanished. In his place stood someone much more dangerous, someone who had just discovered the depth of betrayal from those closest to him. Tom emerged from under the car again, holding something small between his fingers. Found this caught in the undercarriage. Must have fallen from whoever did the cutting. It was a cufflink, gold with the initials TT, engraved in flowing script. Michael took the cufflink, turning it over in his hands. Sarah recognized the look in his eyes. She'd seen it in her own reflection after her mother died. It was the look of someone whose world had just shattered, leaving them with nothing but sharp edges and bitter truths. "Jenkins," Michael said finally, "prepare the lake house. Make it look like I'm there, but I'll need somewhere else to stay. Somewhere Rachel and Terry won't think to look." He paused, considering. "And call Harrison Blake at the security firm. I want everything, surveillance, phone taps, the works, but it has to be invisible. No one can know we're watching." Sarah cleared her throat. "I know a place," she offered hesitantly. "An old caretaker's cottage in the cemetery. No one goes there anymore, but it's still got power and water. That's where I've been staying sometimes, when it rains." Michael looked at her for a long moment, really seeing her for perhaps the first time. The daughter of his former housekeeper, living in a cemetery cottage, had just saved his life. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Thank you, Sarah," he said softly, "for everything, but your part in this is done. I'll make sure you're taken care of, but I can't let you get any more involved. It's too dangerous." Sarah straightened her spine, channeling every ounce of her mother's strength. "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson, I'm already involved. And I'm the only one they don't suspect." She met his gaze steadily. "You need someone on the inside, someone who can move around the property without attracting attention. I can do that." In the secure confines of his private study, Michael Thompson sat before his computer, the glow of the screen illuminating his troubled features. Sarah's file lay open on his desk, a thin folder that contained the few official records of Catherine Matthews' daughter. Birth certificate, school records, and a single photograph of a younger Sarah standing beside her mother in the mansion's kitchen, both smiling at some forgotten joke. "Run it again," he instructed Harrison Blake, his head of security, who stood by the window. "Everything about Catherine Matthews from the past 15 years. Hospital records, employment history, bank statements. I want to know why she came to work for me specifically, and what happened in the 2 years before her death." Blake nodded, his expression grave. "Sir, the preliminary report shows some concerning patterns. Catherine Matthews worked for your parents before their death. She called in sick the night of the fire, the only absence in her entire employment history. 3 years later, she specifically sought employment at your mansion. despite having offers from other wealthy families. But Michael leaned back, memory stirring. I barely noticed her when she worked here. She was just, efficient, invisible. The perfect housekeeper. He picked up the kitchen photograph. But she was watching. All those years she was watching something. There's more. Blake continued, pulling out his tablet. 2 months before her dismissal, Catherine made several late-night copies in your home office. The security logs show her accessing the room at 2 a.m. on 3 separate occasions. The same week, a series of anonymous tips about financial irregularities at Thompson Enterprises was sent to the SEC. Michael's fingers tightened on the photograph. The investigation that almost destroyed us. We never found the source. He looked up sharply. What happened to those documents she copied? Unknown. But the day after her dismissal, Catherine attempted to schedule a meeting with you. Rachel intercepted the request. 2 days later, the diamond bracelet incident occurred. Blake paused. Sir, we found something else. A safety deposit box, rented in Catherine's name. It's still active, with Sarah listed as the co-signer. Michael stood, pacing the room. I want that box opened. Legally, through proper channels. Sarah's a minor, will need a court order. He stopped at the window, watching Sarah in the garden below. She sat on a stone bench, homework spread around her, maintaining her school routine despite everything. What happened to her after Catherine died? Blake consulted his notes. Officially, she became a ward of the state, but she never entered the foster system. She's been surviving on her own, working part-time jobs, staying in shelters, or... He hesitated. The cemetery cottage. Her school attendance is perfect, straight A's across the board. Teachers note her exceptional intelligence, but describe her as deliberately unremarkable, trying not to stand out. Like her mother, Michael murmured. Always watching, gathering information, waiting. He turned back to his desk, pulling up Catherine's employment file. The night my parents died in that fire, what was Catherine's explanation for her absence? Food poisoning, according to the records. But we found something interesting in her medical files from that period. Blake handed over a document. She was treated for smoke inhalation the following day at a clinic across town. She claimed it was from a kitchen accident. Michael's eyes narrowed. She was there. The night of the fire, she was there. He spread the documents across his desk, connecting points in his mind. The financial records she copied, the SEC investigation, her sudden dismissal. Catherine knew something big enough to get her killed. Sir Blake looked alarmed. You think her death wasn't natural? Cancer's a convenient diagnosis when someone needs to die slowly, without suspicion. Michael's voice was hard. I want her medical records audited. Every doctor, every treatment, every prescription. And I want to know who else accessed those records. A soft knock interrupted them. Sarah stood in the doorway, her school backpack clutched tight. Mr. Thompson? I remember something else. The night Mum got sick, Rachel visited our apartment. I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard them arguing. Mum said something about telling the truth before it's too late the next day. She couldn't stop coughing. Michael and Blake exchanged glances. Sarah, Michael said gently, why didn't you tell this to the police? Sarah's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Mum made me promise. She said if anything happened to her, I should wait. Watch. Learn everything I could. She pulled a worn journal from her backpack. She left this for me. I've never shown it to anyone. Michael took the journal with trembling hands. Catherine's neat handwriting filled the page's dates, times, observations. Evidence gathered over years of silent watching. The last entry was dated the day before her final hospital admission. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I failed to finish what I started, but you're stronger than I ever was. When the time comes, you'll know what to do. Trust your heart. Just like I trust you. All the proof is in the place where it began, where fire reveals truth. Detective James Parker stood in the rain outside Arlington Cemetery, watching Sarah's familiar figure slip through the gates at dusk. 2 years of surveillance had taught him her routines, but tonight was different. The girl moved with unusual urgency, her path taking her not to her mother's grave, but toward the old caretaker's cottage. Through his binoculars, he could see she wasn't alone. Michael Thompson walked beside her, their heads bent in serious conversation. Finally, Parker muttered, reaching for his phone to update the case file. For 7 years, he'd been building a case that connected the Thompsons to a series of suspicious deaths, beginning with the fatal fire that killed Michael and Terry's parents. Catherine Matthews had been his confidential informant, feeding him information until her sudden illness silenced her forever. Inside his unmarked car, Parker pulled out a worn file labeled Matthews. His partnership with Catherine had begun by chance, a routine interview about the Thompson house fire that revealed her keen eye for detail and unwavering moral compass. She had noticed discrepancies in the family's financial records, patterns that suggested something far darker than simple tax evasion. "Your daughter Catherine," had said during their last meeting, her voice already weakened by illness. "She's about Sarah's age, isn't she?" When Parker nodded, she continued, "Then you understand why I'm doing this. Some truths are worth dying for, detective. Just promise me you'll watch over Sarah when I'm gone." Parker had kept that promise, becoming Sarah's invisible guardian. He'd arranged for her school fees to be mysteriously paid, ensured the cemetery staff turned a blind eye to her presence, and made sure local cops didn't hassle her for sleeping in the cottage. All while gathering evidence, waiting for the moment when past crimes would finally surface. Now, watching through the cottage window, he saw Michael Thompson examining Catherine's journal, his face illuminated by lamplight. Sarah stood nearby, pulling documents from a hidden compartment beneath a floorboard, papers Catherine had entrusted to her daughter for safekeeping. Parker's phone buzzed with a message from his contact at Thompson Enterprises. Rachel Thompson had just made 3 large withdrawals from her private accounts. Terry Thompson had been seen purchasing plane tickets to non-extradition countries. They were preparing to run. The detective started his car, mind racing through scenarios. The failed brake tampering would have spooked Rachel and Terry, making them desperate. Desperate people made mistakes, but they were also at their most dangerous. And now Sarah was directly in their crosshairs. His dashboard computer chimed with an alert. Rachel Thompson's cell phone was making calls from the cemetery perimeter. Parker's heart rate spiked. She must have followed them. He grabbed his service weapon and radio, calling for backup as he exited the car. Through the cemetery's iron gates, he could see Rachel's slim figure moving between headstones, phone pressed to her ear. Her words carried on the evening air. "He's here, Terry, in the cottage with that little brat. It has to be tonight." Parker moved silently through the shadows, years of investigation crystallizing into this moment. In his ear, his radio crackled softly. Backup was 5 minutes out. In the cottage, he could see Michael discovering the truth about his family's legacy of lies. Sarah stood watch by the window, her young face serious in the gathering dark. Catherine's final words echoed in his mind, "When the time comes, you'll know. The truth always finds its way to light." She had orchestrated this moment, Parker realized. Every document saved, every detail recorded, all leading to this convergence of past and present. His phone vibrated again, a security alert from the mansion. Terry Thompson had just entered the garage, accessing the gun safe Michael didn't know he knew about. Time was running out. Parker reached the cottage door just as Rachel's designer heels crunched on the gravel path. Through the window, he saw Sarah's eyes widen in recognition and fear. Michael turned, Catherine's journal still in his hands, as Rachel's shadow fell across the threshold. The detective made his decision. After 7 years of watching, gathering evidence, staying in the shadows, it was time to step into the light. He pulled his badge from his coat, stepped out of the darkness, and called out, "Mrs. Thompson, I believe we need to talk." Inside the cottage, Sarah's face broke into a relieved smile as she recognized him, the kind stranger who had looked out for her all these years. Michael Thompson's expression shifted from confusion to understanding as he connected another piece of the puzzle. And Rachel, caught between past crimes and present justice, froze in the doorway. Parker held up Catherine's case file, now thick with 2 years of additional evidence. Catherine Matthews left more than just a journal, Mrs. Thompson. She left a trail. One that leads right back to the night of the fire. He stepped forward, thunder rumbling overhead. I think it's time we discussed what really happened that night, don't you? Inside the cemetery cottage, Michael Thompson sat heavily in an old wooden chair, Catherine's journal trembling in his hands. The final pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed were falling into place, each revelation more devastating than the last. Detective Parker stood guard at the door, while Sarah watched Michael's face, waiting for the moment of recognition. "She wasn't just our housekeeper," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Catherine was there that night, trying to save them." His eyes scanned the journal entry dated the night of the fire. Catherine's neat handwriting detailed how she had discovered Terry, then 17, tampering with the mansion's electrical system. She had rushed to warn Michael's parents, but arrived too late. The fire had already taken hold. "Mom never told me everything," Sarah said softly, pulling another document from the floorboard cache. "But she kept this." It was a photograph, edges burnt, showing a younger Catherine standing between Michael's parents. All 3 wore hospital scrubs. She was more than your housekeeper. She was the nurse who helped deliver you and Terry. Michael's hands shook as he took the photograph. Memories flooded back, his mother's stories about the young nurse who had become family, who had stayed with them through his father's heart surgery, his mother's cancer scare. "Katie," he breathed. They called her Katie. She was my godmother. Detective Parker stepped forward, adding his own file to the growing collection of evidence. "Catherine Matthews devoted her life to protecting your family, Mr. Thompson. When she suspected Terry's involvement in the fire, she took a job as your housekeeper to watch him. She knew he'd try again." Sarah pulled out one final item, a sealed envelope addressed to Michael in Catherine's handwriting. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal and began to read. "Dearest Michael, if you're reading this, the truth has finally come to light. I made a terrible choice the night of the fire, protecting Terry instead of telling you everything. I saw such darkness in him, but he was just a boy. I thought I could save him, guide him back to the light. I failed. Your parents were more than my employers, they were my dearest friends. Your mother made me promise to watch over you boys if anything happened to them. I kept that promise the only way I could, by becoming invisible, by watching, by gathering evidence of Terry's growing darkness and Rachel's manipulation. The accident that claimed your parents wasn't the first attempt. Terry's jealousy of you had been festering for years, fed by resentment and shame. Rachel found that weakness, nurtured it, used it. Together, they've been slowly poisoning everything you built. I should have told you sooner, but they discovered I knew too much. The cancer diagnosis wasn't natural. I have proof in the safety deposit box. Box 1256, Arlington National Bank. The key is with this letter. My greatest regret is leaving Sarah alone, but she's stronger than I ever was. She has your mother's spirit, the same courage, the same unflinching dedication to truth. Protect her, Michael. She's the daughter I couldn't give you when you were my godson. Forgive me for my silence, for the years of watching instead of acting. Everything I did was to protect you, even when it meant hiding who I really was. With eternal love. Katie. Michael looked up at Sarah, seeing her mother's features in the girl's determined face. All this time she had been more than just a homeless child warning him of danger. She was family, the last connection to a past he had forgotten, to people who had loved him before wealth and success defined his world. She saved my life, he said quietly. Both of you did. And I never remembered. His voice broke. Years of loneliness, of feeling adrift in his success, suddenly made sense. He had lost more than his parents in that fire. He had lost his godmother, his connection to a simpler, warmer world. Sarah stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Mom used to say that truth doesn't stay buried forever. It grows like a flower through concrete, finding its way to light. Detective Parker checked his watch, his expression grim. "Mr. Thompson, we need to move. Rachel's outside and Terry's on his way with a weapon. It's time to end this for Catherine, for your parents, for everyone they've hurt." Michael stood, squaring his shoulders. The lost boy who had buried himself in work and wealth was gone. In his place stood a man ready to face the truth, to honor the sacrifices made to protect him. He turned to Sarah, seeing not just Catherine's daughter but his own godmother's final gift. "Together," he said firmly, "we end this together." Rachel Thompson stood in the cemetery's gathering darkness, her designer heels sinking into the rain-softened earth as she faced the cottage. The polished facade she'd maintained for years cracked like porcelain, revealing the ruthless calculation beneath. Through the window she could see Michael reading Catherine's letter, Detective Parker standing guard, and that meddlesome child Sarah who had ruined everything. "It's over, Rachel," Detective Parker called out, his badge catching the last light of day. "We know about Thomas Blackwood." Rachel's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Thomas? My dear detective, is that what you think this is about?" She took a step forward, rain beginning to fall. "Poor Thomas was just practice a dry run to make sure I could pull it off. The grieving fiancé, the tragic accident, the insurance payout. People see what they expect to see." Inside the cottage, Michael stood, Catherine's letter still clutched in his hand. "How many others, Rachel? How many lives did you destroy before you chose me?" Destroy, Rachel's voice dripped with contempt. "I elevated them. Those pathetic men lived meaningless lives until I gave them purpose. Thomas was nothing but a spoiled heir. She gestured at the mansion visible through the trees. You were drowning in guilt over your parents' death, building an empire to fill the void. I gave you something to live for." Sarah watched from the window as Rachel's carefully constructed mask fell away completely. The elegant society wife vanished, replaced by something predatory and ancient. Even her posture changed, no longer the perfect posture of a trophy wife, but the coiled readiness of a hunter. "Catherine knew, didn't she?" Rachel continued, pacing like a caged tiger. "That self-righteous woman saw right through me. She was gathering evidence, planning to expose everything. So I did what was necessary. A few strategic donations to the right doctors, a carefully crafted diagnosis, and nature took its course." She smiled, cold and sharp. "Cancer's such a convenient killer." Michael's face went white with fury. "You killed my godmother. You poisoned her, just like you've been poisoning me." Slowly, Rachel admitted, a note of pride in her voice. "Small doses in your evening tea. Nothing lethal, just enough to make you tired, unfocused, dependent on me. Catherine's death was taking too long, you see. I needed to accelerate my plans." Detective Parker moved to block the doorway, his hand on his weapon. "Terry's involvement? Was that your idea too?" Rachel's laugh echoed among the headstones. "Terry? That weak, jealous boy was almost too easy. All those years resenting his perfect older brother, desperate to prove himself. A few kind words, some strategic touches, promises of wealth and power." She shrugged elegantly. "Men are so predictable when they're in love." "He's on his way here now," she continued, checking her diamond watch. "Armed and angry. Did you really think I'd come alone? Terry's always been my insurance policy, so desperate for approval he'd do anything, even kill his own brother." Sarah stepped forward, her mother's courage flowing through her veins. "You're wrong about men being predictable. My mother saw the good in Mr. Thompson, even when he forgot who he was. She believed in him enough to die protecting him." Rachel's perfect features twisted with scorn. "Catherine was a fool. She died protecting secrets that didn't matter, leaving her precious daughter homeless. Was it worth it, little Sarah?" Living in a cemetery, clinging to your mother's grave while life went on without you. Better than living in a mansion built on lies, Sarah shot back. My mother died with honor. You'll live with none. A twig snapped in the darkness, and Terry emerged from the shadows, a gun gleaming in his hand. But instead of joining Rachel, he moved to stand beside Detective Parker. "It's over, Rachel. I heard everything. The police have been recording this whole conversation." Rachel's composure cracked for the first time. "Terry, what are you doing?" "Choosing truth over lies. Catherine helped me see it in the end. Her last words to me before you poisoned her were about forgiveness. About how it's never too late to choose a different path." Terry's voice shook with emotion. "She knew about the fire, about my part in our parents' death, and still, she tried to save me." Michael stepped out of the cottage, standing beside his brother. That's who Catherine was, who she raised her daughter to be. Someone who believes in redemption, in the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. Rachel's hand moved to her purse, but Detective Parker was faster. "Don't," he warned, his weapon drawn. "There's nothing left to play for, Mrs. Thompson. The game is over." As police sirens wailed in the distance, Rachel Thompson, master manipulator, Black Widow, poisoner of bodies and souls, finally showed her true nature. She screamed, a sound of pure rage and thwarted ambition, as years of careful planning crumbled around her. In that moment, she was no longer beautiful, no longer elegant. She was exposed, stripped of her masks, revealed as the monster Catherine had died trying to unmask. In the rain-soaked cemetery, Terry Thompson lowered his weapon, his hands trembling as he faced his brother. The years of carefully concealed hatred and resentment poured out like poison from an old wound, his voice raw with emotion as he began to speak. "You never knew, did you, Michael? How father always compared us, how every conversation ended with 'Why can't you be more like your brother?' Terry's laugh was hollow, echoing among the tombstones. Even at his funeral, all anyone could talk about was how you would carry on his legacy, the perfect son, the worthy heir." Michael stepped closer, Catherine's journal still clutched in his hands. "Terry, I never wanted." "What you wanted didn't matter," Terry's voice cracked. "It was what you were. Everything came naturally to you, the grades, the business sense, the leadership. Do you know what father said to me the night before the fire? He said he was restructuring his will. Everything would go to you, and I would get a small monthly allowance. For your own good, he said, until you learn responsibility." Detective Parker kept his weapon trained on Rachel while documenting every word. Sarah stood in the cottage doorway, seeing the pain etched on both brothers' faces, one twisted by years of jealousy, the other by dawning understanding. "I didn't start that fire to kill them," Terry continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I just wanted to destroy father's study, where he kept the new will. But the flames spread so fast his hands shook harder. Catherine found me trying to break into the safe. She tried to stop me, tried to reach them in time." Sarah's voice cut through the rain. "Mom never blamed you. In her journal she wrote that she saw a lost boy that night, not a murderer." Terry's eyes filled with tears. "She was the only one who ever really saw me. After the fire, she took care of me in secret, brought me food when I couldn't get out of bed, listened when the guilt became too much." He turned to Rachel, his expression hardening. "Then you came along with your sweet poison words." Rachel's perfect lips curved in a mocking smile. "You were so easy to mold, Terry dear. All that repressed anger, that desperate need for validation. I barely had to push at all. You turned my guilt into something ugly," Terry spat. "Made me believe Michael had somehow orchestrated everything, that he'd manipulated father against me. Each time I wavered, you were there with another suggestion, another piece of evidence of how Michael had wronged me." Michael stepped forward, realization dawning. The gambling debts, the failed businesses, they weren't just bad luck, were they? Terry shook his head. "Rachel made sure I kept failing. She had her people sabotage every venture, drive away every investor. Each failure pushed me deeper under her control, made me more desperate to believe her lies about you. And Catherine Michael's voice was deadly quiet. She figured it out. Terry's voice broke. She discovered Rachel's pattern, the string of dead husbands, the suspicious accidents. She tried to warn me, show me proof of Rachel's manipulations. The night before she got sick, she begged me to help her protect you. Sarah stepped forward, her mother's journal held tight. But you didn't. You let Rachel poison her. Terry's face crumpled. I was a coward. Rachel convinced me Catherine would ruin everything, expose the fire, destroy what little family I had left. I didn't know about the poison until it was too late. By then, Rachel had recordings of me confessing to the fire. I was trapped. Poor Terry, Rachel mocked. Always someone else's victim. Always someone else's fault. You weren't trapped, you were exactly where you wanted to be. Playing the victim while plotting your brother's death. No, Terry's voice echoed through the cemetery. Catherine's death woke me up. I started gathering evidence against Rachel, working with Detective Parker in secret. Everything she said about Michael, about our parents, they were all lies, but I needed proof. Michael looked at his brother, seeing him clearly for the first time, not the jealous failure he'd assumed, but a broken man manipulated by a master predator. Why didn't you come to me? Shame, Terry whispered. How could I face you after what I'd done? Catherine was the only one who believed I could change, who saw past my mistakes. When Rachel killed her, he straightened, facing his brother. I knew I had to make it right, even if it meant losing everything. The rain fell harder over Arlington Cemetery, washing away years of carefully constructed lies. Michael Thompson stood between his brother's anguish and his wife's cold malice, the weight of countless missed opportunities and overlooked warnings pressing down on him like lead. I buried myself in work, Michael admitted, his voice heavy with regret. After the fire, after losing our parents, it was easier to focus on building an empire than facing the truth. I failed everyone who tried to help me see it. He turned to Sarah, shame evident in his features. Especially your mother. Catherine's journal lay open in his hands, its pages containing years of careful observations and quiet devotion. She watched over me for years, protecting me while I barely acknowledged her existence. Even when Rachel forced her out, she never stopped trying to save me. Detective Parker stepped forward, shielding Sarah as Rachel shifted restlessly in the growing darkness. Catherine Matthews wasn't just your godmother, Mr. Thompson. She was the thread that could have held this family together. Her dismissal set all of this in motion. Because I was too blind to see what was happening in my own home, Michael's voice cracked. I signed those termination papers without question, never wondering why my most loyal employee would suddenly turn thief. I let Rachel destroy an innocent woman's life because it was easier than asking questions. Sarah's small hand found his arm. Mom understood. She wrote about your pain, how you built walls to protect yourself after losing your parents. She never blamed you. But I blame myself, Michael replied, years of suppressed emotion breaking through. I abandoned my brother when he needed me most. I forgot the woman who helped raise us. I married a stranger because she fit the image I thought I needed. He faced Rachel, seeing her clearly at last. I replaced family with facade. Terry moved closer to his brother, gun still held loosely in his trembling hand. We all failed, Michael. I let jealousy poison my heart. I believed Rachel's lies because they fed my worst instincts. Even after Catherine tried to save me, I chose bitterness over truth. Such beautiful regrets, Rachel's voice cut through the rain like a blade. The prodigal sons reunited over their shared guilt. How perfectly tragic her laugh was brittle. But regret doesn't change the past. Your parents are still dead, Catherine is still gone, and poor little Sarah is still an orphan. You're wrong, Sarah's voice rang out, strong and clear like her mother's. The past doesn't own us. Mom taught me that every choice is a chance to change direction, to choose truth over lies, courage over fear. Michael looked at the girl who had risked everything to warn him, seeing Catherine's strength shining through her daughter's eyes. "Your mother's last gift wasn't just saving my life. It was showing me who I'd become and who I could still be." Detective Parker's radio crackled with approaching sirens. "It's time to make those choices count. Rachel Thompson, you're under arrest for the murder of Catherine Matthews, the attempted murder of Michael Thompson, and a series of deaths we're just beginning to uncover." As officers emerged from the darkness surrounding the cottage with drawn weapons, Michael faced his greatest regret. "I forgot who I was, what our parents taught us about family and trust. I let success become a shield against feeling, against connecting." He turned to Terry. "But Catherine never gave up on either of us. Through Sarah, she gave us one last chance to make things right." Terry lowered his gun as officers approached, surrendering it quietly. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he whispered. "Maybe not," Michael answered, watching Rachel being handcuffed, her perfect mask finally shattered. "But Catherine believed in redemption. She saw something worth saving in both of us. Honoring her memory means trying to become the men she believed we could be." Sarah stood in the cottage doorway, her mother's journal pressed to her chest. The rain had soaked her completely, but her eyes were dry and clear. "Mom used to say that mistakes don't define us, it's what we learn from them that matters." As Rachel was led away, her threats and accusations fading into the night, Michael Thompson felt the weight of years of wrong choices, of missed chances and buried truths. But in that weight, in the presence of his brother's remorse and Sarah's forgiveness, he finally understood what Catherine had tried to teach them all, that redemption begins with facing our mistakes, and healing starts when we stop running from the past. In the weeks following Rachel's arrest, the Thompson mansion underwent a transformation. Gone were the cold, perfect arrangements and sterile elegance Rachel had imposed. Instead, Sarah's school books scattered across the kitchen table, her worn backpack hung by the door, and the sound of her laughter echoed through halls that had known only silence for years. Michael found himself lingering over breakfast each morning, captivated by Sarah's stories about her teachers, her classes, and her dreams. She approached everything with the same quiet determination Catherine had shown, whether tackling advanced mathematics or carefully tending the small garden she'd started beneath her mother's old window. "Mom always said this spot got the best morning light," Sarah explained one Saturday, her hands deep in the soil. Michael knelt beside her, his expensive suit forgotten, as she taught him how to plant the seeds Catherine had loved. She used to grow herbs here, secret little plants tucked between the formal roses. Rachel never noticed. "I never noticed either," Michael admitted, watching Sarah's careful movements. "I missed so much, walking past this garden every day. Your mother filled this house with small acts of kindness I was too busy to see." Sarah looked up at him, soil smudged on her cheek. "But you see them now. Mom said that's what matters, being willing to learn. To open your eyes," she hesitated, then added softly, "She kept a journal about you too, you know. Not just the evidence, but stories about when you were little." That evening they sat in the kitchen, not the formal dining room, sharing sandwiches, while Sarah read from Catherine's personal diary. Michael learned about his first steps, taken while holding Catherine's fingers, about how she'd secretly helped him practice his college interviews, listening from the hallway while he rehearsed, about the pride in his parents' eyes when he graduated, and Catherine's own quiet joy at seeing her godson succeed. "I wish I remembered," Michael said, his throat tight. "All these years she was more than just our housekeeper. She was family." "She never stopped being family," Sarah replied, wise beyond her years. "Even after everything with Rachel, she made sure I knew all about you. The real you, not just the businessman everyone else saw." And their days fell into a new rhythm. Michael moved his home office to the sunroom, where he could watch Sarah doing homework in the garden. He learned her schedule, which days she had chess club, when she needed to study for tests, what foods made her smile. Small details that painted a picture of the remarkable girl Catherine had raised. One evening, helping Sarah with her history project, Michael found himself sharing stories about his own parents. "Your mother was there the day I won my first debate competition. Father couldn't make it business meeting, but Catherine sat in the back row, beaming like I'd won an Olympic medal." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. She kept the program. "It's in her memory box, along with the photo of you holding the trophy. She said it was the day she knew you'd do great things." But the memory box became their evening ritual. Each night they would open it together, discovering new connections between past and present. Photos, ticket stubs, small mementos. Catherine had preserved, each one a thread weaving their lives together. "I found this today," Sarah said one night, pulling out a faded drawing. "I made it when I was 5. It's supposed to be you, Mum, and me in the garden." The childish figures stood holding hands, surrounded by wobbly flowers. "Mom kept it all these years." Michael studied the drawing, seeing the family Catherine had tried to protect, the connection she'd never stopped believing in. She saw what could be. Even when the rest of us were blind, he looked at Sarah, this extraordinary girl who had saved his life in more ways than one. "She made sure you saw it too." Their bond grew stronger with each shared memory, each quiet moment of understanding. Michael learned to listen, not just with his ears, but with his heart, a skill Catherine had tried to teach him years ago. He saw her influence in Sarah's quiet strength, her unfailing moral compass, her ability to find light in the darkest places. One morning, Michael arrived in the kitchen to find Sarah attempting Catherine's special pancake recipe. The counter was dusted with flour, and the first attempts were slightly charred, but her determined expression was pure Catherine. "Mom said you used to love these when you were sick," she explained, flipping another slightly lopsided pancake. She'd make them secretly, telling the other staff they were trying a new recipe for fancy brunches. Michael took a bite, and suddenly he was 12 again, feverish in bed, with Catherine's cool hand on his forehead and the comfort of her special pancakes chasing away the illness. "They're perfect," he said softly, watching Sarah beam with pride. Together, they were learning to build something new from the fragments of the past, not just a home, but a family bound by love, truth, and Catherine's enduring legacy of kindness. From behind the prison's bulletproof glass, Rachel Thompson orchestrated her revenge with the same precision she had once used to plan dinner parties. Her perfectly manicured nails, maintained even in custody, tapped rhythmically against the visiting room table as she met with her high-priced attorney, laying out an intricate web of new deceptions. "The girl is the key," Rachel explained, her voice maintaining its cultured smoothness. "Sarah Matthews has Michael wrapped around her little finger, playing the perfect orphan, just like her scheming mother." Her lips curved in a cold smile. "But every orphan has secrets, and I found hers." Through a network of loyal contacts, Rachel had discovered irregularities in Sarah's birth certificate. Catherine Matthews' listed marriage had never been registered, the father's name left conspicuously blank. A careful investigation revealed more gaps: missing school records, unexplained absences, and most intriguingly, a period where both mother and daughter had vanished completely. "Plant the seeds of doubt," Rachel instructed her lawyer. "Suggest that Catherine was more than just a loyal servant. Imply that Sarah might be Michael's illegitimate child, a product of an affair he's forgotten or denied. Watch how quickly his newfound paternal instincts turn to suspicion." The plan unfolded like a poisonous flower. Anonymous letters began arriving at the Thompson mansion, containing old photographs of Catherine looking distressed, engaged in heated conversations with Michael's father. Court documents suggesting a possible payoff. Medical records hinting at covered-up paternity tests. "The beauty of it," Rachel purred during another legal consultation, "is that it doesn't matter if it's true. The doubt alone will destroy them. Michael will start seeing Catherine's betrayal instead of her loyalty. He'll look at Sarah and wonder if she's manipulating him, just like I did." But Rachel's schemes went beyond mere psychological warfare. Through carefully coded messages passed through her extensive network, she orchestrated financial attacks on Thompson Enterprises. Shell companies began hostile takeover attempts. Long-buried scandals mysteriously surfaced in the press. each move designed to force Michael to choose between protecting his company and caring for Sarah. When the pressure builds, Rachel explained to her increasingly uneasy attorney, he'll do what he always does: retreat into work, shut out emotions, forget about playing family with that little imposter. It's his nature. I made sure of that over the years. Her most devastating attack came through the child services system. Anonymous reports raised concerns about Sarah's living situation. Questions about the legality of Michael's guardianship. Suggestions that a traumatized child needed professional institutional care, not the unstable environment of a man recently betrayed by his wife and brother. From her prison cell, Rachel watched the chaos unfold with cold satisfaction. Each news report of Thompson Enterprises stock fluctuations, each tabloid speculation about Sarah's parentage, each social services investigation added another crack to the foundation of Michael and Sarah's growing bond. You see, Rachel told her reflection in the prison mirror, love is weakness. Family is a fairy tale. I taught Michael that lesson once, and he'll learn it again. She adjusted her prison-issue uniform with the same grace she had once worn designer gowns. Catherine thought she could protect them through death. I'll destroy them through life. But Rachel's greatest weapon was still to come. Through her network, she had located someone from Catherine's past, a man willing to claim paternity of Sarah, armed with just enough circumstantial evidence to make his case believable. His sudden appearance would force Michael to either fight a lengthy custody battle or watch Sarah be taken away. Everything precious has a breaking point, Rachel mused, watching another visiting hour tick away. Michael's is his need for truth. Sarah's is her desperate desire for family. One well-placed lie will shatter both. Her attorneys filed motion after motion, each designed to delay her trial while her schemes took root. Every legal maneuver bought more time for doubt to grow, for pressure to build, for the happy ending Catherine had tried to ensure to unravel thread by thread. In the prison yard, other inmates gave Rachel wide berth, sensing the dangerous calculations behind her perfect smile. Guards watched her warily, noting how even in custody she maintained an air of control, of patient certainty that her plans would succeed. The thing about happy families, Rachel told her attorney during their final meeting of the week, is that they're built on trust. And trust, once poisoned, dies faster than any of Catherine's beloved garden flowers. Her laugh echoed against the prison walls, cold and certain. I don't need to be free to destroy them. I just need to remind them that no one is truly who they seem to be. Detective James Parker stood in his dimly lit office at 3 a.m., surrounded by walls covered in evidence from the Catherine Matthews case. New connections appeared daily, each revelation more disturbing than the last. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he barely noticed, too engrossed in the web of crimes that Rachel Thompson had woven over decades. 4 previous marriages, he muttered, pinning another photo to the board. Each husband dying in suspicious accidents, each death investigated by different departments in different states. He drew a red line connecting the photos, seeing Rachel's pattern emerge. Young wealthy men, all dead within 5 years of marriage, their fortunes mysteriously depleted. The evidence from Catherine's safety deposit box had blown the case wide open. Medical records showing gradual poisoning, financial documents tracing money movements, and most damning of all, Rachel's own detailed notes, discovered hidden in a false bottom of her jewelry box after her arrest. She documented everything Parker told his partner, Detective Sarah Chen, as they reviewed the files. Every poison, every manipulation, every step of her plans. It wasn't just about money. She enjoyed the process, the slow destruction of her victims. The investigation revealed Rachel's methodology with chilling clarity. She chose her targets carefully: wealthy men with troubled family relationships, emotional vulnerability she could exploit. Michael Thompson had been her masterpiece, a successful man carrying deep childhood trauma, ripe for manipulation. But she didn't count on Catherine, Chen observed, studying the timeline Parker had constructed. the housekeeper who saw everything, who kept her own detailed records. Parker nodded, picking up Catherine's journal. Catherine was building a case for years. She knew Rachel would eventually try to kill Michael, just like the others, but she needed ironclad proof enough to ensure Rachel could never talk her way out. The detective's investigation expanded beyond Rachel's crimes. He uncovered a pattern of corporate sabotage, targeting every business venture Terry Thompson attempted. Bank records showed systematic undermining of Terry's projects, all traced back to shell companies Rachel controlled. She needed him desperate, Parker explained to the district attorney. Isolated, financially dependent, easy to manipulate. She spent years ensuring Terry would be ready to help kill his own brother when the time came. But the most disturbing discovery centered on Catherine's death. Parker's forensic team found traces of exotic toxins in samples from Catherine's preserved tissue. Substances that cause symptoms mimicking natural cancer progression, virtually undetectable unless specifically tested for. She killed her slowly, Parker said, his voice heavy with anger. Months of careful poisoning making it look like a natural illness. All because Catherine was getting too close to the truth. The investigation also revealed Rachel's extensive network of corrupted professionals, doctors who provided false diagnoses, lawyers who buried evidence, financial advisors who helped hide money trails. Each arrest led to more revelations, more connections, more victims. Late one night, reviewing security footage from the Thompson mansion, Parker noticed something crucial. In the weeks before Catherine's dismissal, Rachel had systematically removed and replaced security cameras, creating blind spots in the surveillance system. She was planning Catherine's elimination long before the bracelet incident, he told Chen. The theft accusation was just a convenient trigger, a way to get rid of the one person who could expose her. The detective's most shocking discovery came from Rachel's prison communications. Despite being in custody, she was still orchestrating attacks against Michael and Sarah. Parker's team intercepted coded messages, revealing plots to destroy their newly forming family bond. She's not done, he warned Michael during a secure meeting. Even from prison, she's trying to tear apart everything Catherine died protecting. We need to be ready for whatever she plans next. As Parker stared at his evidence wall, a pattern emerged within the pattern. Rachel hadn't just been killing wealthy men, she'd been systematically destroying families, taking pleasure in unraveling the bonds between people. Catherine, with her quiet devotion to the Thompsons, had represented everything Rachel despised. We're not just building a murder case, Parker realized. We're exposing a lifetime of calculated destruction. Rachel Thompson isn't just a black widow, she's a surgeon of souls, cutting away at human connections with precise, poisonous skill. The detective picked up a childhood photo of Sarah, taken by Catherine years ago. The girl's smile was bright, trusting, everything Rachel had tried to destroy. In Sarah's resilience, in her ability to help heal the Thompson family, Catherine had achieved a victory that Rachel, with all her clever schemes, could never undo. The medical examiner's office was cold and sterile as Dr. Emily Walsh laid out her findings before Detective Parker, Michael Thompson, and Sarah. The young girl sat perfectly still, her mother's journal clutched to her chest, as the doctor explained what the new toxicology tests had revealed about Catherine's death. It wasn't cancer, Dr. Walsh began, her voice gentle but firm. Your mother was systematically poisoned with a combination of substances designed to mimic the progression of aggressive lymphoma. The primary toxin was a rare compound derived from Asian plants, virtually undetectable unless specifically screened for. Sarah's knuckles whitened around the journal, but her voice remained steady. She knew. In her last entry, she wrote about tasting something metallic in her tea, about how Rachel always insisted on serving her personally. Dr. Walsh nodded, spreading out the laboratory results. The poisoning began approximately 6 months before her diagnosis. Small doses, administered regularly, building up in her system. The symptoms would have appeared gradually: fatigue, weakness, unexplained bruising. Classic cancer indicators. Michael's face had gone ashen as he studied the reports. Catherine was trying to tell me something that last week, but I was too busy with a merger. I kept rescheduling our meeting, telling her it could wait. His voice cracked. She died before I made time. She documented everything Detective Parker added, opening Catherine's medical file. Even while she was dying, she kept gathering evidence. The dates, the symptoms, which days Rachel served her tea. She knew she wouldn't survive, but she made sure we'd eventually find the truth. Sarah pulled out a worn envelope from her mother's journal. She wrote this the night before her final hospital admission. I was supposed to open it if anything happened to her. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter, reading aloud. My dearest Sarah, by the time you read this, Rachel's plan will have succeeded. I can feel the poison working faster now, but I need you to understand I chose this end. I could have run, could have exposed everything immediately, but that would have left Michael vulnerable. Rachel would have found another way to destroy him, and I made a promise to his parents to protect their sons. The evidence I've gathered is incomplete. Rachel is too careful, too methodical. My death, properly documented, will be the final proof needed to expose her true nature. Detective Parker knows where to look, what tests to run. The truth will come out, but it must be after she believes she's won. Forgive me for leaving you alone. You are stronger than I ever was, carrying light where I could only watch from shadows. Trust Michael beneath the walls Rachel built around him beats the heart of the boy I helped raise. He will remember, when the time is right. All my love. Mom. The silence in the examination room was heavy with the weight of Catherine's sacrifice. Dr. Walsh continued gently. The final doses were administered during her hospital stay. Someone tampered with her IV bags, adding the toxin to her medications. Rachel visited every day, Sarah whispered. Bringing tea, adjusting Mom's pillows, playing the concerned friend. I remember Mom trying to warn me with her eyes, but I didn't understand then. Detective Parker produced surveillance footage from the hospital. Catherine knew she was being recorded. Watch her hand movements when Rachel visits. She's signing in police code. She learned it from her father, who was a detective. She's documenting Rachel's actions, giving us proof even in her final hours. Michael moved to stand beside Sarah, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. She chose to die on her own terms, using her death to protect us all. Even at the end, she was thinking of others. Dr. Walsh gathered her reports, her professional demeanor softening. Catherine Matthews didn't die from cancer. She died completing a case that would save lives. Her sacrifice ensured Rachel Thompson will never hurt another family. Sarah stood, her mother's journal and final letter held close. Mom used to say that truth needs light to grow. She gave her life to bring Rachel's darkness into the light. She looked up at Michael, her eyes filled with her mother's determination. She protected your family until the end. No, Michael corrected gently, she protected our family, and will honor her sacrifice by making sure Rachel never hurts anyone again. The old groundskeeper's cottage in Arlington Cemetery had become their war room. Michael Thompson, Detective Parker, Terry and Sarah gathered around a makeshift table, blueprints and surveillance photos spread before them. Outside, autumn rain tapped against the windows as they finalized their plan to expose Rachel's network of conspirators. Rachel expects me to use that mountain road tomorrow morning, Michael explained, tracing the route on the map. She's been watching my routine for months, knowing I always take that curve at precisely 7:15 a.m. Her people will be expecting a fatal accident report. Detective Parker nodded, laying out surveillance photos of Rachel's known associates. We've identified 3 key players: Dr. Marcus Wright, who forged Catherine's cancer diagnosis, James Sullivan, the insurance adjuster who covered up her previous husband's deaths, and Patricia Lane, the lawyer managing her offshore accounts. They'll all emerge to play their parts once they think I'm dead, Michael continued, his voice hard. Wright to confirm the death, Sullivan to expedite the insurance payout, Lane to begin transferring funds. We'll catch them all in one net. Sarah, who had insisted on being part of the planning, pointed to the cemetery's layout. The groundskeeper's cottage has a perfect view of the curve. We can document everything from here without being seen. Terry, still struggling with his role in Rachel's schemes, added quietly, "She'll expect me to verify the accident scene. I'm supposed to call her lawyer the moment I confirm Michael's death." The plan they crafted was precise, worthy of Rachel's own meticulous plotting. A specialized crash test vehicle, identical to Michael's Mercedes, would be positioned at the curve. Remote controls would send it over the edge at exactly 7:15 a.m., creating the accident scene Rachel's people would expect to find. "The car needs to burn," Detective Parker insisted. "Rachel will want photos. She'll examine every detail before making her next move." Michael pulled out Catherine's journal, opening to a marked page. According to Catherine's notes, Rachel has a specific sequence she follows after each husband's death. First, she contacts her lawyer to initiate the will execution. Then she moves funds through a series of shell companies. Finally, she stages a very public breakdown, the grieving widow act she's perfected. Sarah, who had inherited her mother's eye for detail, studied the surveillance photos. These three people, they were all present at Mom's funeral too. Rachel keeps using the same team, the same pattern. "Because it's worked every time," Terry added bitterly. "She's so confident in her method that she doesn't see the trap." The team worked through the night, choreographing every detail. Michael recorded video messages, appearing distressed, talking about business pressures, breadcrumbs for the investigation Rachel would expect. Terry prepared the documentation his sister-in-law would demand, making sure every detail aligned with her expectations. Parker's surveillance teams took their positions around the cemetery and the crash site, disguised as groundskeepers and early morning joggers. Every angle was covered, every possible reaction anticipated. "Sarah, you'll stay in the cottage with Officer Chen," Michael instructed, his voice brooking no argument. "I know you want to help, but your safety is non-negotiable. Catherine trusted me to protect you." The girl nodded, understanding but frustrated. Mom spent years watching, gathering evidence. Now we'll finish what she started. As dawn approached, they reviewed their roles one final time. The crash would trigger a carefully orchestrated sequence: Terry's panicked call to Rachel's lawyer, the emergency response team's all undercover officers, the insurance adjuster's swift arrival, and finally, Rachel's own carefully planned reaction from prison. Remember, Parker cautioned, Rachel has eyes everywhere. Every display of grief, every shocked reaction, every official response must be perfect. She'll analyze everything, looking for signs of deception. Michael looked around the cottage, at this unlikely team brought together by Catherine's sacrifice. Rachel thinks she's orchestrating another perfect murder. Instead, she's walking into a trap years in the making. Catherine gave us the blueprint, now we honor her memory by using it. The first light of dawn painted the cemetery in shades of grey as they took their positions. Michael squeezed Sarah's shoulder one last time before departing, not to his death on a mountain road, but to a hidden command center where he would watch Rachel's carefully constructed world finally crumble. At precisely 7:16 a.m., Rachel Thompson received the call she'd been waiting for in her prison cell. Terry's voice trembled perfectly as he delivered the news: Michael's car had failed to navigate the mountain curve, plunging into the ravine and erupting in flames. Her face remained impassive, but her eyes gleamed with cold triumph. "Are you absolutely certain it's him?" she asked, maintaining the grieving wife's tone for the prison guard's benefit. "I can't bear any mistakes, not with something this terrible." Her performance was flawless, every catch in her voice, every barely suppressed sob calculated for maximum effect. "Oh, the car. It's completely destroyed," Terry reported, his voice breaking. "The police are saying no one could have survived. Rachel, I can't believe he's really gone." His anguish sounded genuine, perhaps because it was, though not for the reasons Rachel assumed. Within hours, the machinery of Rachel's carefully laid plans whirred to life. Dr. Marcus Wright arrived at the crash site with suspicious promptness, ready to expedite the death certificate. James Sullivan, a trusted insurance adjuster, began preparing the multi-million-dollar claim before the wreckage had even cooled. From her prison cell, Rachel orchestrated every detail through coded messages passed through her attorneys. Her legal team filed emergency motions for temporary release to attend her husband's funeral. Her financial advisors began positioning assets for transfer. Every piece moved exactly as she had planned. Mrs. Thompson, the prison warden, announced that afternoon, "Given the circumstances, you've been granted supervised leave to make funeral arrangements." The man's sympathy was evident. Rachel's reputation for philanthropic work had earned her considerable goodwill, even in prison. Patricia Lane, Rachel's personal attorney, arrived with a black mourning outfit that cost more than most prison guards made in a month. "Everything is proceeding as planned," she whispered while helping Rachel change. "The will reading is scheduled for tomorrow. Your position as sole heir is secure." Rachel allowed herself a small smile as she adjusted her designer veil. "Poor Michael," she murmured, practicing her public grief. "He never did learn to slow down on that dangerous road." Her reflection showed the perfect picture of a devastated widow, her makeup artfully smudged, her elegant black suit suggesting restrained dignity in the face of loss. At the crash site, Terry played his role to perfection. He paced the police line, occasionally breaking down in carefully timed displays of brotherly grief. News cameras captured his emotional collapse when the coroner's van arrived, broadcasting his anguish to millions of sympathetic viewers. The Thompson family asks for privacy during this difficult time, Patricia Lane announced to the press, standing beside Terry. Mrs. Thompson is naturally devastated by this tragic accident. She's grateful for the court's compassion in allowing her to arrange her beloved husband's funeral. Throughout the day, Rachel's network of conspirators moved with practiced efficiency. Dr. Wright expedited the death certificate. Citing accidental death due to vehicle malfunction, Sullivan processed the insurance paperwork with suspicious speed. Bank accounts were accessed, transfer authorizations prepared. By nightfall, Rachel sat in her attorney's luxury office sipping champagne while watching news coverage of the accident. To Michael she toasted softly, who finally took his last drive. Her perfect mask slipped for a moment, revealing the predator beneath. And to dear Catherine, who tried so hard to warn him. "The offshore accounts are ready," Patricia reported, sliding over documents for Rachel's signature. "Once the will is executed, everything transfers to your control. The prison release paperwork should be finalized within weeks, given the circumstances." "And the girl?" Rachel asked, her voice sharp. "Sarah Matthews, what becomes of her?" "Without Michael's guardianship, she'll return to state care," Patricia assured her. "I've already contacted family services. No loose ends." Rachel leaned back, savoring her apparent triumph. Everything had fallen into place: Michael's death, the insurance payout, her imminent release, and the final dismantling of Catherine's remaining legacy. Even Terry had played his part perfectly, his grief providing the perfect cover for their scheme. "It's almost poetic," she mused, watching helicopter footage of the crash site. The great Michael Thompson, undone by a simple mechanical failure, just like poor Thomas Blackwood and dear Richard Spencer before him. Her laugh was soft, satisfied. Men never do learn to check their vehicles carefully enough. From the groundskeeper's cottage, Sarah watched Rachel's performance through Detective Parker's surveillance feed, her mother's journal open beside her. With Officer Chen's help, she documented every move Rachel's network made, matching their actions against Catherine's meticulously recorded patterns. There Sarah pointed at the screen, where Dr. Wright examined the crash site. Mom wrote about him how he always appears within an hour of each death, just like he did when she was sick. Her young voice carried an edge of steel as she logged the timestamp. "He's wearing the same gold watch Rachel gave him after signing Mom's death certificate." Officer Chen nodded, photographing the feed. "Good catch." What else did your mother note about him? Sarah flipped through the journal's worn pages. He makes 2 calls after confirming each death, first to Rachel's lawyer, then to a burner phone Mum couldn't trace. And, look, she pointed to the live feed where Wright followed the exact pattern Catherine had documented. Working methodically, just as her mother had taught her, Sarah built a detailed timeline. James Sullivan's arrival at exactly 10 a.m., briefcase containing pre-prepared insurance forms. Patricia Lane's press conference, using the same phrases Rachel had used after her previous husband's deaths. Every move following Catherine's predicted script. Mum knew Rachel would never change her method, Sarah explained, organizing the evidence. She said predators like her are creatures of habit. Their confidence in their own perfection becomes their weakness. Throughout the day, Sarah tracked the money movements Catherine had warned about. Offshore accounts activating in sequence, property transfers initiating, shares changing hands, all documented with the same careful attention to detail her mother had shown. Rachel thinks she's won, Sarah murmured, watching the surveillance feed of the prison release hearing. Just like she thought she'd won when Mom got sick. But Mom taught me that truth leaves traces, like breadcrumbs leading to light. In the cottage's small bathroom, Sarah discovered a hidden message Catherine had left years ago, scratched behind a loose tile. My dearest, when the time comes, check the gardener's shed. Some flowers bloom even after frost. Following her mother's clue, she found a waterproof container buried beneath the rose bushes, containing additional evidence Catherine had safeguarded. Mum knew Rachel would try again, Sarah told Detective Parker when he checked in. These documents show the pattern going back 20 years, all the men Rachel married, all the accidents, all the payouts. Mom was building a case long before she even came to work for Michael. As twilight approached, Sarah compiled everything into the format her mother had designed: photographs, financial records, phone logs, and surveillance footage, all cross-referenced with Catherine's journal entries. Each piece of evidence matched perfectly with the patterns Catherine had predicted. Rachel's not just on trial for Michael's attempted murder, Sarah explained to Officer Chen, her mother's strength evident in her voice. She's facing justice for everyone she's hurt: Mom, Michael's parents, all her previous husbands. Mom made sure every connection would be clear when the time came. The most damning evidence came from Rachel herself. Sarah had positioned small cameras in the attorney's office, capturing Rachel's champagne celebration and unguarded admissions. Every word, every gesture, every moment of triumph carefully recorded, just as Catherine had taught her daughter to do. The predator's greatest weakness, Sarah quoted from her mother's journal, is believing she's the smartest person in the room. Real intelligence leaves room for doubt. Real strength acknowledges weakness. Rachel has neither. As night fell over the cemetery, Sarah completed her task. Every document digitized, every recording backed up, every piece of evidence secured. Catherine's years of careful observation, combined with Sarah's own meticulous documentation, created an unbreakable chain of proof. "We did it, Mom," she whispered, touching her mother's photograph. "Everything you worked for, everything you sacrificed for, it's all coming together. Rachel thought she was writing the ending, but you wrote it long ago. You just needed me to follow your path to truth." The Thompson Estate's Grand Library had been transformed into a command center on the morning of the will reading. Behind its heavy oak doors, Michael Thompson, very much alive, watched multiple surveillance screens while Detective Parker coordinated with teams positioned throughout the mansion. "Everyone in position?" Michael asked, adjusting his tie. The past week of hiding had been necessary, but today would end the charade. On the monitors, he could see Rachel arriving in her widow's black, Patricia Lane at her side, playing their roles in what they thought was their final act. "All teams report ready," Parker confirmed, checking his earpiece. "Dr. Wright and Sullivan just arrived. Sarah's evidence is being transmitted to the DA's office in real time. The moment Rachel makes her move, we're ready." In the library's hidden surveillance room, Sarah sat with Officer Chen, running final checks on the recording equipment. Her mother's journal lay open beside her laptop, its pages marking the exact sequence Rachel would follow. Mom wrote that Rachel always celebrates too early, she noted. She'll want to gloat before the will reading. Right on cue, Rachel entered the mansion's study, her chosen stage for private triumph. The hidden cameras captured her removing her mourning veil, her mask of grief falling away as she poured herself a celebratory drink. But to perfect endings, she toasted her reflection in the study's mirror. And to dear Catherine, who thought she could outsmart me, her laugh echoed through the surveillance speakers, cold and satisfied. Patricia Lane joined her, carrying the falsified will documents they planned to present. Everything's prepared. Once the reading begins, the transfers will initiate automatically. Within hours, the entire Thompson fortune will be under your control. And our friend Terry, Rachel asked, examining her flawless manicure. Waiting in the garden, right where you wanted him. Once the will is read, the accident we arranged for him will complete the story. Grief-stricken brother, unable to bear his guilt, takes his own life. Lane's smile matched Rachel's in its cruelty. In the surveillance room, Michael's hands clenched into fists. Even knowing it was part of their trap, hearing them discuss Terry's planned murder tested his control. Sarah touched his arm gently, reminding him of the larger plan. Meanwhile, Dr. Wright and Sullivan gathered in the conservatory, unaware of the microphones capturing their conversation as they reviewed their roles. Wright would confirm the death certificate details if questioned. Sullivan had the insurance paperwork ready, all perfectly forged. Positions Parker commanded through his radio as the official time for the will reading approached. Police teams silently took their places throughout the mansion. In the garden, Terry activated his wire, knowing his sister-in-law would seek one final private conversation before the reading. Rachel didn't disappoint. She found Terry by Catherine's old rose bushes, her predator's instincts drawing her to this final kill. Dear brother, she purred, touching his shoulder. You've played your part so perfectly. Catherine would be proud if she hadn't been fool enough to get in my way. The hidden cameras caught every detail: Rachel's triumphant smile, the cold calculation in her eyes, the way she subtly checked the garden for witnesses. Her mask had completely dropped, revealing the monster Catherine had died exposing. It's almost over, Rachel continued, her voice soft with false comfort. Just the reading to get through, then you can join our dear Michael. I've arranged everything. It will look so tragic, so inevitable. In the surveillance room, Sarah watched the woman who had killed her mother reveal her true nature. Every word was being recorded, every admission added to the mountain of evidence Catherine had begun collecting years ago. The mansion's clock struck 10, signaling the time for the will reading. Rachel adjusted her veil, grief mask sliding perfectly back into place. Lane gathered the fraudulent documents, while Wright and Sullivan took their positions as witnesses. Now, Parker commanded. Throughout the mansion, his teams moved silently into place. In the garden, Terry led Rachel toward the library, where Michael waited behind the hidden panel. Sarah activated the final recording sequence, ensuring every moment would be captured. "This is for you, Mum," she whispered, watching Rachel sweep into the library like a queen approaching her coronation. "You showed us the way. Now we'll finish what you started." The trap was set, every player in position, every escape route covered. Rachel Thompson, master manipulator and Black Widow, was about to face the justice Catherine Matthews had died arranging. In the hidden room, Michael straightened his tie one final time, prepared to rise from the dead and confront the woman who had tried to destroy everything he loved. No one anticipated Rachel's final, desperate move. As Michael emerged from the hidden panel in the library, revealing himself to his stunned wife, Rachel's composure cracked completely. In one fluid motion, she grabbed Sarah, who had stepped out to witness her mother's vindication, and pressed a small pearl-handled pistol to the girl's temple. "Did you really think I wouldn't have a contingency plan?" Rachel's voice had lost all its cultured smoothness, replaced by something feral and desperate. Catherine's precious daughter, how fitting that she'll join her mother. The gun pressed harder against Sarah's head, but the girl remained eerily calm, her mother's strength flowing through her. "Drop your weapons," Rachel commanded as police officers emerged from their positions, or Catherine's sacrifice becomes meaningless. Her perfect mask had shattered, revealing the cornered predator beneath. Sarah could feel Rachel's hand trembling, the desperation of a woman watching her carefully constructed world collapse. Michael stepped forward, hands raised. "Rachel, think about what you're doing. It's over. Catherine's evidence, Sarah's documentation, you can't escape this." Escape? Rachel's laugh was almost hysterical. "This was never about escape, Michael. It's about power. Control. Breaking things that are too pure to exist." Her grip on Sarah tightened. Like Catherine's insufferable nobility, her dedication to truth, and now her precious daughter's belief in justice. Sarah met Michael's eyes, trying to convey a message. She had noticed something Rachel hadn't. They were standing directly beneath the library's massive crystal chandelier, the one Catherine had always insisted on cleaning herself. The same chandelier her mother had subtly weakened over years of maintenance, creating an emergency weapon few would suspect. "Mom knew you'd do this," Sarah said quietly, feeling Rachel stiffen behind her. "She wrote about your patterns, how you always need one final dramatic gesture, how your pride makes you predictable." Rachel's grip tightened painfully. "Your mother was a servant who forgot her place. She died alone in a hospital bed, poisoned by her own tea, watching everything she loved slip away." "No," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "She died protecting the people she loved, leaving a legacy you'll never understand." With that, she suddenly dropped her weight, just as Michael had been quietly signaling her to do. The chandelier, its support weakened by years of Catherine's careful preparation, broke free at the exact moment Sarah dropped. Rachel, caught off guard, fired upward reflexively. The massive crystal fixture crashed down, missing Sarah by inches but catching Rachel in a shower of glass and metal. Chaos erupted. Police swarmed forward as Rachel went down, the gun skittering across the floor. Sarah rolled clear, immediately enveloped in Michael's protective embrace. Detective Parker secured Rachel, who lay trapped beneath the chandelier's remains, her perfect appearance finally as shattered as her schemes. Catherine, Rachel gasped, blood from small cuts staining her black designer dress. Catherine did this. She knew, all along. Sarah stood shakily, supported by Michael. "Mom knew you'd never suspect the chandelier. You were too focused on your own cleverness to notice her preparing for this moment, even years after her death." As paramedics rushed in and police secured the scene, Sarah touched the small locket she always wore, the one containing a tiny photo of her mother. Even in death, Catherine had protected her, had anticipated Rachel's final desperate move and prepared a counter years in advance. Michael hugged Sarah tighter, both of them watching as Rachel was handcuffed and strapped to a gurney. "Your mother," he said softly, "was the most remarkable person I've ever known." "She still is," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "She knew truth would win in the end. She just had to make sure we were ready when it did." In Catherine's garden, where she had once tended roses while quietly protecting those she loved, Michael Thompson sat with Sarah on the stone bench. The aftermath of Rachel's arrest lay heavy on his shoulders as he fingered the worn pages of Catherine's journal. "I failed her," he said quietly, watching the sunset paint the roses in shades of gold. "Your mother was more than just an employee. She was my godmother, my protector, a connection to everything good in my past. And I forgot her, buried myself so deep in success that I couldn't see her sacrifices." Sarah, wise beyond her years, touched the journal in his hands. "Mom wrote about you every day. Even when you stopped noticing her, she never stopped believing in the boy she helped raise. She said wealth couldn't change your heart, it just buried it for a while." Tears, long suppressed behind walls of corporate success, finally broke free. "She saved my life 3 times. First, as a child when she stayed up nights during my fever. Then through you warning me about Rachel's plot, and finally through her preparation with the chandelier. Each time, I never thanked her properly. The night before she died, Sarah revealed, Mom made me promise something. She said, when Michael remembers who he is, don't let him drown in guilt. Tell him I chose my path knowing exactly where it led. Michael's hands trembled as he opened the journal to its final entry. Catherine's elegant handwriting filled the page. My dearest godson, if you're reading this, you finally remembered. Don't waste time on regret. Your parents entrusted me with your protection, and I fulfilled that duty gladly. Your heart was always good. Michael, it just needed time to find its way home. Standing, Michael walked to the rose bushes Catherine had planted decades ago. Beneath their blooms, generations of secrets had been kept, lives had been saved, and truths had been protected. I want to honor her properly, he said, turning to Sarah. Not just with a memorial or a foundation, but by becoming the man she always knew I could be. Sarah joined him by the roses, her mother's strength evident in her posture. Mom said true redemption isn't about grand gestures. It's about small choices, daily acts of kindness, remembering what matters most. Together they began planning. The mansion would become a home for children who, like Sarah, had lost their parents. Catherine's garden would be expanded, becoming a place of healing and hope. Most importantly, Michael would step back from corporate life, focusing instead on the human connections he had neglected for so long. Your mother taught me that wealth means nothing without purpose, Michael said, watching Sarah tend the roses just as Catherine had done. I spent years building an empire of empty rooms and hollow success. She spent those same years building something far more valuable, a legacy of love and protection. As darkness fell over the garden, Michael made a silent vow to the woman who had given everything to protect him. He would honor Catherine's sacrifice not through guilt, but through action. Each child given a home, each life touched by kindness, would be a tribute to her unwavering faith in the goodness of others. We'll do it together, Sarah said, understanding his unspoken thoughts. That's what Mom would have wanted her two favorite people, helping others find their way home. Michael hugged her close, feeling Catherine's presence in the garden she had loved. His redemption wouldn't erase the past, but it would build a future worthy of her sacrifice. In saving him one final time, Catherine had given him back, not just his life, but his heart. In the psychiatric ward of the state prison, Rachel Thompson's perfect facade crumbled like the crystal chandelier that had ended her reign. Her designer prison uniform, once worn with elegant defiance, hung disheveled on her frame as she paced her cell, muttering Catherine's name over and over. She planned everything Rachel whispered to her reflection in the reinforced window. The chandelier, the evidence, the girl Catherine mapped out my downfall years before her death, her manicured nails, now ragged, scraped against the glass as she traced invisible patterns. She's still watching, still controlling everything from her grave. The prison psychiatrist observed through the monitoring system as Rachel's carefully constructed reality continued to fragment. The woman who had orchestrated multiple murders with clinical precision now jumped at shadows, convinced Catherine's spirit lurked in every corner of her cell. They don't understand, Rachel told her visitors, her once cultured voice taking on a frantic edge. Catherine wasn't just a housekeeper. She was gathering evidence, planting seeds, raising that girl to be her weapon. Every cup of tea I served her, she was watching. Every move I made, she anticipated. During group therapy sessions, Rachel would suddenly stop mid-sentence, staring at empty chairs as if seeing Catherine's ghost. Her fellow inmates gave her a wide berth, unnerved by the way she would sometimes laugh abruptly, sharing private jokes with an invisible presence. I killed her, Rachel announced one morning, her voice almost gleeful. Poisoned her tea, just like the others. But she knew she drank it anyway, turned my victory into her weapon. Even dying, she was 3 steps ahead of me. Her laughter echoed through the prison corridors, sharp and brittle as breaking glass. The final break came during a routine legal consultation. Her attorney presented new evidence being used in the prosecution. Catherine's detailed records of Rachel's previous murders, preserved in a safety deposit box. Rachel's composure shattered completely. "She's everywhere," she screamed, sweeping the documents off the table. "In every file, every record, every shadow. Catherine Matthews, the perfect servant, the noble protector, she won't let me rest." Guards had to restrain her as she tried to tear the papers to shreds, still screaming about Catherine's omniscient presence. In her more lucid moments, Rachel would sit perfectly still, her posture a grotesque parody of her former elegance. "I should have seen it," she would murmur to the empty air. The way she cleaned that chandelier, how she kept such meticulous records, how she raised that girl to be her living testimony. Catherine turned my own perfectionism against me. The prison staff documented her descent, how she would arrange her meager belongings with obsessive precision, only to destroy them in fits of rage, claiming Catherine had touched them. How she would write endless letters to Michael and Sarah, filling pages with alternating threats and pleas, begging them to make Catherine's presence leave her alone. Her final public appearance at the trial was a spectacle that shocked the courtroom. The polished black widow who had charmed her way through multiple murders appeared wild-eyed and disheveled, her expensive prison outfit torn and stained. "Catherine wins," she declared to the stunned court. "She orchestrated everything: my capture, my imprisonment, even my madness. She knew her death would destroy me more thoroughly than any prison sentence." Then she laughed, the sound echoing off the courtroom walls like shattering crystal. Rachel Thompson, master manipulator and calculating murderess, had finally lost control of the one thing she valued most: her own mind. In her padded cell, she continued her conversations with Catherine's ghost, her once perfect world reduced to endless dialogues with the woman who had outsmarted her from beyond the grave. In the dimly lit prison visiting room, Terry Thompson faced his brother Michael for the last time before starting his reduced sentence. The evidence of his cooperation had earned him leniency, but the weight of his final betrayal, not of Michael, but of Rachel, hung heavy between them. "I recorded everything," Terry confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Every meeting, every plan she shared with me after Catherine died. Even while playing her puppet, I was gathering evidence." He pushed a small USB drive across the table. "This is the last piece: conversations Rachel didn't know I documented." Michael studied his younger brother, seeing both the lost boy who had started the fire and the man who had finally chosen truth over manipulation. "Why did you wait so long to turn against her?" Terry's hands trembled as he withdrew a worn photograph from his pocket. It showed Catherine standing between the Thompson brothers on their parents' last Christmas, her smile warm and protective. "The night before Rachel poisoned her, Catherine visited me. She knew what was coming, but instead of exposing me, she offered forgiveness." The recording Terry had made of that final conversation played in the prison's evidence room later that day. Catherine's voice, already weakened by Rachel's poison, remained gentle. "Terry, revenge and redemption walk the same path. The choice of which to follow is made step by step, day by day. Rachel offers you revenge, but I'm offering you a chance to make things right." "I didn't deserve her kindness," Terry continued, tears falling freely now. "But Catherine saw something in me worth saving. She knew Rachel would try to kill Michael, so she gave me a choice: help Rachel and lose my soul completely, or help expose her and find redemption." Michael listened as his brother detailed the months of careful documentation, of playing Rachel's willing accomplice while secretly working with Detective Parker. Each piece of evidence Terry gathered had strengthened the case Catherine had built. "My final betrayal wasn't betraying you or Rachel," Terry said quietly. "It was betraying Catherine's faith in me by waiting too long to act. She died believing I would make the right choice sooner. Instead, I let fear and shame silence me until Sarah showed the same courage her mother had." Rising to leave, Terry handed Michael one last item: Catherine's old house key, which she had given him the night before her death. She said when the time came, I would know what to do with this. It opens a small safe in her old quarters, containing evidence about Rachel she didn't trust anyone else to find. As guards led Terry away, Michael watched his brother's shoulders bend under the weight of choices made and opportunities lost. Terry's redemption had come too late to save Catherine, but her faith in him had ultimately helped bring Rachel to justice. The safe, when opened, contained a letter addressed to Terry in Catherine's handwriting. Your path to redemption may be long, but it's never too late to take the first step. I forgive you for the past. Now you must learn to forgive yourself. Terry would serve his reduced sentence knowing that his final betrayal turning against Rachel instead of his brother had honored Catherine's last wish. In choosing truth over vengeance, he had finally become the man she believed he could be. The prestigious law office of Blackwood Associates fell silent as Rachel Thompson, still in her widow's black, swept in for the reading of Michael's will. Attorney James Harrison's corner office, with its mahogany paneling and city views, became the stage for her final performance, or so she thought. Before we begin, Harrison stated formally, there are some irregularities that must be addressed. He gestured to the office door, where Detective Parker entered, followed by Sarah. Rachel's perfect composure flickered for just a moment. Irregularities. Rachel's voice remained steady, though her fingers tightened on her designer handbag. I assure you everything is in order. My husband's wishes were quite clear. She withdrew a document with practiced grace. I have the most recent version of the will right here. Actually, Harrison replied, we have 3 versions of Michael Thompson's will. The original, your forged copy, and he paused as the door opened again, the one he updated last week. Michael Thompson stepped into the office, very much alive. Rachel's mask cracked completely, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the shock that drained all color from her face. That's impossible, she whispered. I saw the wreckage. The body. Did you, Michael asked quietly, or did you see what Catherine taught us you needed to see? He moved to stand beside Sarah, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Your pattern, Rachel. She documented every step you would take. Harrison spread the evidence across his desk. Catherine's journals, financial records, Rachel's own documentation of her previous murders. Mrs. Thompson, you are under arrest for multiple counts of homicide, attempted murder, and conspiracy. You have nothing, Rachel snarled, her cultivated accent slipping. Catherine is dead. Her evidence died with her. She reached for her bag, but Detective Parker was faster, seizing it to reveal the pearl-handled pistol hidden inside. Mom knew you'd come armed, Sarah said softly. Just like she knew you'd choose this office, this time, this exact moment to claim your victory. She wrote it all down, every detail of how you operated. Rachel's laughter held an edge of hysteria. A dead housekeeper's notes? Against my word. My position. She turned to Harrison. James, surely you understand how ridiculous this is. Actually, Harrison responded, I understand perfectly. Which is why I've been working with Detective Parker since Catherine first brought her concerns to me years ago. Every meeting in this office, every document you've handled has been recorded. Michael stepped forward. It's over, Rachel. Catherine's legacy wasn't just her evidence, it was teaching us how to see through your perfect facade, how to recognize the predator behind the mask. As police officers entered the office, Rachel made one final desperate move, lunging towards Sarah. But the girl didn't flinch, standing firm just as her mother had taught her. Detective Parker intercepted Rachel smoothly, the handcuffs clicking shut around her manicured wrists. You're just like her, Rachel spat at Sarah as she was led away. That same self-righteous nobility, that same misplaced faith in justice. Her perfect mask crumbled completely, revealing the rage beneath. I should have killed you when I killed her. The confession, captured on Harrison's office recording system, was the final piece of evidence Catherine had predicted Rachel would provide. Even in her moment of defeat, Rachel's pride had betrayed her, just as Catherine had written it would. Sarah watched Rachel's departure with quiet dignity, her mother's strength evident in her bearing. Mom said truth doesn't need masks, she told Michael. It just needs time and courage to come to light. The courthouse fell silent as Detective Parker approached the evidence table, carrying Catherine Matthews' weathered journal, The prosecution had saved their strongest witness for last, and the detective's steady demeanor commanded attention from every corner of the packed courtroom. "Your Honor," Parker began, "what we present today isn't just evidence of a single attempted murder. It's the culmination of a 7-year investigation built on the foundation of one remarkable woman's sacrifice." He opened Catherine's journal with careful reverence. Catherine Matthews didn't just document crimes, she mapped the psychology of a predator. Methodically, Parker laid out the pattern Rachel Thompson had followed with each husband. Photographs, financial records, and medical reports created a damning timeline. The detective pointed to specific journal entries where Catherine had predicted Rachel's next moves with chilling accuracy. "Look at the dates," Parker instructed the jury, displaying a series of bank transfers. Every victim followed the same sequence. Life insurance policies upgraded 3 months before death. Property transferred into private holdings 2 months before. And in each case, a suspicious car accident on a winding road. Rachel sat at the defense table, her mask of indifference cracking as Parker revealed how thoroughly Catherine had documented her methodology. Mrs. Matthews didn't just gather evidence, the detective continued. She created a psychological profile so detailed that we were able to predict and record Mrs. Thompson's every move during our final operation. Video footage played on the courtroom screens, Rachel's celebration in Michael's study, her threats to Terry in the garden, her final confrontation with Sarah. Each moment captured exactly as Catherine had predicted in her journal entries years before. But the most damning evidence, Parker said, lifting a small wooden box, was found in the safety deposit box Catherine Matthews maintained. Inside lay vials of the exotic poison Rachel had used, along with a detailed record of how she had obtained it. Mrs. Matthews allowed herself to be poisoned slowly, documenting every symptom, every dose, creating a blueprint for us to prove Mrs. Thompson's other murders. Sarah, sitting in the front row beside Michael, watched as Parker methodically connected Rachel's past crimes to Catherine's evidence. Her mother's careful observations had created an unbreakable chain of proof, each piece supporting the next. In her final journal entry, Parker read, his voice carrying through the hushed courtroom, Catherine Matthews wrote, "Rachel believes she's writing the ending to this story. But she's actually writing her own confession, word by word, move by move. My death will be her last successful murder, because it will give others the strength to expose her truth." The detective then revealed the surveillance footage from the chandelier incident, showing how Catherine had prepared years in advance for Rachel's final desperate move. Even from beyond the grave, Mrs. Matthews protected her daughter and ensured justice would be served. As Parker concluded his presentation, he turned to face Rachel directly. Mrs. Thompson crafted a perfect facade of wealth and sophistication, but Catherine Matthews saw the predator beneath. Every detail in this evidence, every prediction in her journal, strips away that facade piece by piece by piece. But the courtroom remained silent as Parker's words hung in the air. Rachel's carefully maintained composure had crumbled completely, her expression a mixture of rage and disbelief as she realized how thoroughly Catherine had outmaneuvered her. "The prosecution rests. Your Honor," Parker concluded, closing Catherine's journal with gentle respect. Mrs. Matthews has presented her own testimony through years of careful documentation. She gave her life to ensure this evidence would be complete, irrefutable, and justice would finally be served. On the final day of testimony, Terry Thompson took the stand against his sister-in-law, his hands trembling as he unfolded a letter Catherine had given him the night before her death. The courtroom leaned forward as he began to read, revealing the twisted origins of Rachel's murderous path. Rachel Thompson wasn't born evil, Terry testified, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. She was born Patricia Reynolds, daughter of a wealthy family who lost everything. She watched her mother poison her father for insurance money, learned at her knee how to turn marriage into murder. Detective Parker displayed a series of photographs on the courtroom screens. Rachel as a young girl, watching her mother's trial, Rachel changing her identity with each marriage, Rachel methodically recreating her mother's methods with increasing sophistication. She didn't just want wealth, Terry continued, avoiding Rachel's venomous stare. She needed to prove she could do it better than her mother, who got caught after just one murder. Each successful killing fed her conviction that she was superior, untouchable. The prosecution presented Rachel's diary, discovered in her prison cell, revealing an obsession with perfecting the art of murder by marriage. Each husband had been chosen not just for wealth, but for their potential to be erased without suspicion. "I was her perfect tool," Terry admitted, shame evident in his voice. "But my resentment of Michael, my guilt over our parents' death, she cultivated every weakness. But Catherine saw through it all. She recognized Rachel's pattern because she'd studied similar cases while helping the police investigate her own father's suspicious death years ago." Rachel's composure finally shattered as her true history emerged. "You think you understand?" she screamed, rising from her seat. "Catherine was nothing. A servant who dared to judge me, to think she could outsmart me with her pathetic moral superiority." But the outburst confirmed everything Catherine had written about Rachel's core motivation: not just greed, but a pathological need to prove her superiority over those she considered beneath her. Rachel chose Michael, Terry explained, not just for his wealth, but because Catherine protected him. She needed to prove she could destroy something Catherine cherished, to assert her dominance over the one person who saw her true nature. As Terry's testimony continued, the full scope of Rachel's manipulation emerged. How she had orchestrated Terry's failed businesses, ensuring he remained dependent on her. How she had isolated Michael, slowly poisoning him to make him emotionally vulnerable. How she had planned to eliminate them both, staging Terry's suicide after Michael's accident. Catherine knew everything, Terry concluded, finally meeting Rachel's eyes. She chose to drink the poisoned tea, to die slowly while gathering evidence, because she knew her death would be Rachel's undoing. She trusted that Sarah would finish what she started, that truth would eventually overcome Rachel's perfect lies. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as Rachel's facade crumbled completely. The sophisticated socialite vanished, replaced by a snarling creature of pure malice, screaming accusations at Catherine's ghost. It was the final confirmation of everything Catherine had documented: the predator beneath the polished mask, exposed at last to the light of truth. "Let the record show," the prosecutor stated calmly, "that Mrs. Thompson has just confirmed her role in Catherine Matthews' murder through her own words." Sarah, watching from the gallery, held her mother's journal close. Everything was unfolding exactly as Catherine had predicted: Rachel's pride becoming her downfall, her perfect mask shattering to reveal the darkness beneath. The evidence was complete, the true motives laid bare. Rachel Thompson, master manipulator and daughter of a murderess, had finally been outmaneuvered by the very woman she had considered beneath her notice. Catherine Matthews, through careful planning and willing sacrifice, had ensured that justice would ultimately prevail. The courtroom stood silent as Judge Eleanor Martinez prepared to deliver her verdict. Rachel Thompson, stripped of her designer clothing and carefully crafted persona, sat in prison garb, her perfectly manicured nails now ragged from months in custody. In the gallery, Sarah held Michael's hand tightly, Catherine's journal resting in her lap. "In my 30 years on the bench," Judge Martinez began, "I have never encountered a case where evil was so methodically documented and justice so carefully orchestrated from beyond the grave. Catherine Matthews didn't just gather evidence, she created a blueprint for truth to triumph over carefully constructed lies." The judge lifted Catherine's journal, which had been entered as the primary evidence. "This document does more than prove Mrs. Thompson's guilt. It reveals the extraordinary courage of an ordinary woman who gave her life to protect others, who faced death with dignity, while ensuring justice would eventually prevail." Rachel's face contorted with rage as the judge continued. "The court finds Rachel Thompson guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder, including the premeditated poisoning of Catherine Matthews. Additionally guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and multiple counts of financial crimes." The sentence came down like a thunderbolt: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. to be served in maximum security isolation. Furthermore, all assets are to be liquidated and placed in a trust for the victims' families. But Judge Martinez wasn't finished. In recognition of Catherine Matthews' extraordinary service to justice, this court orders the establishment of a victim protection program in her name. The Catherine Matthews Foundation will provide support and resources to help other victims document and expose systematic abuse. Rachel, her mask finally shattered completely, stood to face her sentence. She was nothing, she screamed. A servant who dared to judge me, to think she could outsmart me. I killed her. I watched her die slowly, thinking I had won. And that the judge responded calmly was your fatal mistake. Catherine Matthews understood that true justice doesn't need elaborate schemes or perfect masks. It needs only patience, courage, and an unwavering commitment to truth. As Rachel was led away, still ranting about Catherine's betrayal, Sarah opened her mother's journal to its final entry. To those who read this after I'm gone, remember that truth has its own power. It doesn't need wealth or status or perfect facades. It needs only a steady heart and the courage to stand firm. The Catherine Matthews Foundation became Catherine's final legacy. The money from Rachel's seized assets would help other victims gather evidence, document abuse, and find the strength to seek justice. The foundation's logo, designed by Sarah, featured a simple rose, beautiful but strong, just like her mother. Michael established a scholarship in Catherine's name, providing education for children of domestic staff at major estates. Terry, serving his reduced sentence, volunteered to share his story, helping others recognize and resist manipulation. As Rachel began her life sentence in isolation, her perfect world reduced to a small cell, Catherine's influence continued to grow. Her methods of documentation became a model for investigating similar cases. Her journal was studied by law enforcement agencies as a master class in exposing systematic abuse. Judge Martinez's closing words echoed through the justice system. Let the case of Catherine Matthews serve as a reminder that justice often comes not from the powerful, but from those who quietly serve, observe, and choose truth over safety. Her sacrifice ensures that future predators will find it harder to hide behind wealth and sophistication. Sarah, standing in the courthouse sunshine afterward, held her mother's journal close. "You did it, Mom," she whispered. "You showed us that truth doesn't need masks or money or power. It just needs someone brave enough to stand by it until the end." On a bright spring morning, 6 months after Rachel's conviction, Michael Thompson and Sarah Matthews stood before Judge Martinez once again, this time in family court. The adoption papers lay ready on the judge's desk, representing not just a legal bond, but the fulfillment of Catherine's deepest wish. Before we proceed, Judge Martinez said warmly, "I'd like to read something from Catherine Matthews' journal." She opened to a page marked with a pressed rose petal. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, Michael has finally remembered who he truly is. The boy I helped raise, the man I knew he could become. Trust him, as I have always trusted him, even when he forgot himself." Sarah, wearing a simple blue dress that Catherine had bought for her last birthday, squeezed Michael's hand. The past months had transformed their relationship from protector and protected to something deeper. Each evening spent in Catherine's garden, each story shared about her mother, had strengthened their bond. "Catherine was more than my godmother," Michael addressed the court, his voice thick with emotion. "She was the conscience I forgot I had, the connection to truth I tried to bury under success. Through Sarah, she gave me back my soul. This adoption isn't charity or obligation, it's acknowledging the family we already are." Judge Martinez smiled, remembering how Catherine had once confided her hopes for these two people she loved most. "Sarah Matthews, you've shown remarkable strength and wisdom beyond your years. Do you choose to become Sarah Matthews Thompson, understanding that this honors both your mother's memory and creates a new future?" Sarah stood straight, Catherine's dignity evident in her bearing. "My mother believed family isn't just about blood, it's about choice, about standing together in truth. She chose to protect Michael, and now we choose to honor her legacy by becoming the family she always knew we could be." The judge lifted her pen but paused for one final statement. Catherine Matthews transformed tragedy into triumph, protection into legacy. This adoption marks not an ending, but a continuation of her remarkable love story, a story of chosen family, of courage, and of truth's ultimate victory. With flourishing signatures, Sarah Matthews became Sarah Matthews Thompson. As Judge Martinez pronounced the adoption final, Michael hugged his daughter close, both of them feeling Catherine's presence in that moment of joy. Outside the courthouse, spring flowers bloomed in planters Catherine had once tended during her lunch breaks. Sarah touched the petals gently, remembering her mother's words about how beauty could grow in the most unlikely places. "She's here with us," Michael said softly, watching his daughter no longer just Catherine's legacy, but his own chance at redemption. In every choice we make, every truth we honor, every moment we choose love over fear. Sarah nodded, her mother's locket catching the sunlight. She knew this day would come. That's why she never gave up on either of us. Together, they walked down the courthouse steps toward their future father and daughter, bound not by tragedy but by love, carrying Catherine's light forward into a new chapter of their shared story. The Catherine Matthews Memorial Home rose from the grounds of the old Thompson estate, its warm brick walls and sunlit windows a stark contrast to the cold mansion that once stood there. Michael and Sarah had chosen to transform the symbol of Rachel's malice into a beacon of Catherine's enduring love. "Mom always said every child deserves a safe place to grow," Sarah explained to the architects, pointing to the garden she'd designed. "The building should embrace the gardens, like arms holding children close." Her mother's influence shaped every detail, from the cozy reading nooks to the carefully tended flower beds that would give troubled children a sense of nurturing something beautiful. Michael had surprised everyone by personally overseeing the construction, often found discussing plans with workers while wearing jeans and work boots instead of his former custom suits. "Catherine taught me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts," he told the board of directors. "It's in the lives we touch, the hope we nurture." The home's central feature was the Catherine Matthews Learning Center, where children would receive not just education, but the life skills Catherine had valued so deeply. The walls featured her favorite quotes about truth, courage, and the power of kindness. The library housed thousands of books, each bearing a bookplate with Catherine's favorite saying, "Knowledge lights the path to understanding." On opening day, as children began filling the halls with laughter, Sarah stood in her mother's garden, now expanded into a therapeutic space where young residents could heal through nurturing growing things. She would have loved this, she told Michael, watching a small girl tentatively touch a rose petal, turning pain into purpose, loss into legacy. Detective Parker, now a regular advisor to the home security team, joined them by the rose bushes. Catherine saw potential in everyone, he remarked, watching the children explore their new home. "She'd be proud to see how you've created a place where others can discover their own strength." The home's mission statement, carved in stone at the entrance, read in memory of Catherine Matthews, who taught us that family is built through love, not circumstance. Here, every child will find the safety to grow, the courage to heal, and the freedom to become their truest self. Each bedroom featured a small garden window, allowing residents to grow their own plants, a direct connection to Catherine's belief in nurturing life. The dining hall served family-style meals, encouraging the bonds of shared experience that Catherine had always valued. As the sun set on opening day, Michael and Sarah sat on Catherine's old garden bench, watching their new extended family take root. "Mom, new homes aren't built with bricks," Sarah said softly. "They're built with love, truth, and the courage to begin again." The Catherine Matthews Memorial Home became more than just an orphanage. It became a testament to one woman's enduring vision of love's power to transform lives. In its walls, countless children would find what Catherine had always offered: a chance to grow in truth, strength, and the unwavering belief that every life deserves to bloom. Sunday dinners at the Thompson household became a celebration of the family Catherine had envisioned. The formal dining room, once the stage for Rachel's perfect performances, now rang with genuine laughter as an unlikely collection of people gathered around the table that Michael had personally built from Catherine's favorite oak tree. Terry, on weekend release from his reduced sentence, brought his quiet wisdom earned through hard lessons. Detective Parker, no longer just an investigator, but a trusted friend, shared stories of Catherine's clever observations that had helped solve other cases. The Holmes children, invited in rotating groups, brought the innocent joy Catherine had always cherished. "Mom would have loved this chaos," Sarah remarked one evening, watching Michael teach two young residents how to properly set a table not for show, but for the genuine pleasure of caring for others. She always said real families are messy, loud, and perfectly imperfect. The kitchen, once Rachel's showcase of untouched appliances, became the heart of their home. Michael and Sarah continued Catherine's tradition of Sunday baking, often with help from the Holmes children. The recipes were simple Catherine's comfort foods rather than gourmet creations, but each dish carried the warmth of shared memories and new traditions. "Catherine taught me that wealth isn't measured in bank accounts," Michael told a young boy who was struggling with trust. "It's measured in the strength of our bonds, the depth of our care for each other." The boy, like many others, found healing in the simple act of being included, of belonging somewhere safe. Even Terry found redemption in these gatherings. His quiet contributions to the home's maintenance, his patient teaching of woodworking to interested children, became his way of honoring Catherine's belief in second chances. "She saw the good in me when I couldn't see it myself," he often said. "Now I try to see it in others." The garden, expanded to feed their growing family, flourished under Sarah's care. She taught the children Catherine's methods, explaining how each plant needed different kinds of attention, just like people. The vegetables they grew together supplied their Sunday dinners, creating a cycle of nurture and nourishment that Catherine would have understood perfectly. Detective Parker brought his own family to these gatherings, his children forming fast friendships with the Holmes residents. His wife, a counselor, volunteered her services to the home, extending Catherine's legacy of healing through understanding. "Family isn't about perfect appearances," Michael would say during these dinners, echoing Catherine's wisdom. "It's about perfect acceptance, seeing each other's flaws and loving anyway." The children from the home, many scarred by broken trust, slowly learned to believe in this different kind of family. As their unusual family grew, Catherine's presence remained strong not as a ghost, but as the foundation upon which they built their bonds. Her photographs smiled from the walls, her wisdom guided their choices, and her love continued to shape the way they cared for each other. 5 years after Rachel's conviction, the Catherine Matthews Memorial Garden bloomed in full spring glory. Michael Thompson stood among the roses his godmother had loved, watching Sarah graduate from law school with highest honors. Her valedictory speech, dedicated to her mother's legacy, moved even the most stoic attendees to tears. "My mother taught me that hope isn't about waiting for light," Sarah told the gathered crowd. "It's about being the light, even in darkness." She showed us that redemption isn't found in grand gestures, but in daily choices to stand for truth, to protect the vulnerable, to believe in the power of love over fear. The Catherine Matthews Foundation had grown beyond their initial dreams, now supporting dozens of cases similar to theirs. Sarah's first job would be leading its legal department, ensuring other victims of systematic abuse found the same path to justice her mother had carved out. Terry, released from prison and working as the home's maintenance supervisor, had found his own redemption in teaching troubled youth the value of honest work. His woodworking classes became therapy sessions where broken spirits learned to rebuild themselves, just as Catherine had believed they could. Detective Parker, now heading a special unit devoted to investigating complex domestic crimes, used Catherine's methods to train new officers. Look for the quiet ones, he would teach. The ones who observe, who keep careful records, who see beneath perfect surfaces. They're often the key to uncovering truth. Michael had transformed completely from the distant corporate titan he once was. He taught business ethics at local colleges, using his own story as a cautionary tale about the price of choosing wealth over wisdom. But he also taught hope, showing how it's never too late to remember who you were meant to be. The children from the home flourished under their unconventional family's care. Many went on to careers in social service, law enforcement, or counseling, extending Catherine's legacy of protection and truth. Each success story was celebrated in the garden she had loved, under the roses that still bloomed as if she tended them. Rachel's perfect world of facades and manipulation had crumbled to dust, but from its ashes rose something far more precious, a community built on Catherine's principles of truth, courage, and unwavering love. The mansion's gates, once symbols of exclusion, now stood permanently open, welcoming all who needed family. On the 5th anniversary of the home's opening, they gathered in Catherine's garden. Michael, Sarah, Terry, Detective Parker, and dozens of children whose lives had been transformed by Catherine's legacy. As twilight painted the roses gold, Sarah read from her mother's journal one last time. To those who find these words, remember that hope isn't naive and love isn't weak. They are the strongest forces in the universe, capable of transforming tragedy into triumph, pain into purpose. Stand firm in truth, believe in the power of small kindnesses, and never doubt that light will eventually overcome darkness. The garden glowed with lanterns as night fell, each light representing a life touched by Catherine's sacrifice. Her story, once a tragedy of betrayal and loss, had become a beacon of hope, proving that love's legacy grows stronger with each heart it touches, each life it transforms. In the end, Catherine Matthews' housekeeper, protector, mother had built something more lasting than Rachel's perfect facades or Michael's corporate empire. She had built a family bound not by blood but by choice, a legacy that would continue touching lives long after her own was sacrificed for truth. If this story of love, sacrifice, and redemption touched your heart, we invite you to join our community of storytellers. Share your thoughts in the comments about what Catherine's legacy means to you. Your voice matters in this journey of truth and healing. Subscribe to our channel to support our team's commitment to bringing powerful narratives that celebrate the triumph of courage over darkness. Every subscription helps us continue crafting stories that remind us of love's enduring power. Hit the like button to help others discover this tale of extraordinary sacrifice and redemption. Share this video with friends and family who might need a reminder that hope prevails, even in the darkest times. Together, let's honor those quiet heroes who, like Catherine, changed the world through unwavering love and dedication to truth.